Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the winter of 1850, and you probably won't survive this. Not in the heroic sense, not with swelling music, but in the slow, grinding way poverty tests the body and the spirit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me your city and the time you're listening. Somewhere in Victorian London, church bells are already answering that question for you, tolling through fog so thick it feels textured, almost chewable. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the street, or more accurately you huddle. December has taken London by the collar, and it doesn't let go gently. The cobblestones beneath your boots are slick with a mixture of frost, horse dung and yesterday's rain, all ground together by traffic that never truly sleeps. Gas lamps glow like weak moons, their light swallowed by coal smoke and mist. Somewhere nearby, bells ring out for Advent services, and they sound festive in theory. But here they mostly mark time. Another hour cold, another hour closer to night. This is not the London of postcards or novels. It's a city of nearly 2.5 million people by mid-century, and you are one of the many who live pressed against its edges, invisible unless you become a problem. A historical fact worth sitting with. By 1850, over half of London's population lived at or near the poverty line, surviving on irregular wages that could vanish with a single illness or injury. Christmas doesn't pause that math. If anything, it sharpens it. You pull your coat tighter, though it's thin and shiny at the elbows, passed down, mended and passed down again. Cold works its way in anyway. It always does. You pass shop windows dressed in greenery and candlelight, geese hanging proudly, oranges stacked like small suns, puddings wrapped in cloth. You don't stop because stopping implies wanting, and wanting implies disappointment. Still, your eyes flicker. Everyone's do. Hope is a reflex. The bells grow louder as you near a church, and with them comes that peculiar Victorian mix of comfort and accusation. Religion in this era is everywhere, woven into law, charity and daily speech. It tells you suffering has meaning, that endurance is virtuous. Scholars still debate whether this framework helped the poor survive psychologically, or simply kept them compliant. Tonight, standing in the cold, it feels like both. You turn down a narrower street and the sound changes. Fewer hooves, more coughing, the buildings lean inward, bricks sweating moisture, windows patched with paper or rags. This is where you live. Not in a house, but in a room. One room that contains sleep, meals, arguments, laughter when it happens, and grief when it insists. Privacy is a luxury you've never known. Warmth is a rumour. Inside, the air smells of damp wool, boiled cabbage and coal dust. The fire is low because coal costs money, and money has already been spent, carefully, painfully. A quirky but very real fact. Some families would extinguish their fires entirely at night and relight them in the morning using embers borrowed from neighbours, a small economy of shared survival. Tonight you let the fire live a little longer. It's Christmas week. That feels like permission. You sit, or more accurately you perch. Furniture is sparse and multi-purpose. A bed doubles as a bench, a crate serves as a table. You listen to the sounds of the building, the shuffling above, the argument below, the baby crying somewhere to the left. It's a kind of communal breathing, the structure inhaling and exhaling misery and persistence in equal measure. Outside, the bells ring again, and for a moment you let yourself imagine what they're supposed to mean. Peace on earth. Goodwill. There's a strange comfort in ritual, even when reality contradicts it. Victorian Londoners, especially the poor, leaned heavily on these markers of time. Christmas mattered not because it changed circumstances, but because it promised, briefly, that circumstances might soften. You think about tomorrow, about work that may or may not exist, about wages that stretch like watered-down soup. Child labour is not a scandal here, it's an expectation. Children as young as 5 work in factories, markets and streets, their small hands prized for fitting where adults can't. It's efficient, it's horrifying, and it's normal. You don't call it exploitation, you call it survival. A draft snakes along the floor and you shift your feet to avoid it. Cold has a way of making you acutely aware of your body. Every ache, every hunger pang. Victorian doctors debate whether cold itself causes illness or merely weakens the body enough for disease to take hold. Either way, the result is the same. Winter kills quietly. Yet despite all of this, something stirs. You feel it in the way people speak a little softer this week, in how a neighbour saved a scrap of ribbon, in how even the bells sound slightly warmer tonight. Christmas is coming. Not as a miracle, not as salvation, but as a pause, a breath. And for now, that's enough to keep you standing in the cold, listening, enduring. Morning doesn't arrive so much as seep in, a thin grey light filtering through the grime on the window and landing on your face like a reluctant visitor. You wake before you're ready because the room wakes you. Someone shifts, someone coughs, someone's stomach makes an unignorable sound. In a single-room dwelling, sleep is a shared negotiation, and morning always wins. You sit up slowly, careful not to wake those still clinging to a few more minutes of warmth, and you immediately feel it, the cold that settled in overnight, patient and thorough. This room holds everything you own and everyone you love, which sounds poetic until you remember it also holds damp walls, stale air, and the lingering smell of yesterday's meals. There is no hallway to retreat into, no door to close when tempers rise. Victorian reformers often describe these spaces in reports with words like overcrowded and unsanitary, but those words don't quite capture what it feels like to live without solitude. You're never alone, even in your thoughts, because someone is always close enough to hear you breathe. You dress quickly, layering what you can. Clothes are chosen not for fashion but for function, and even then they rarely succeed. Wool itches, cotton thins, everything smells faintly of smoke. A historical fact that tends to surprise modern listeners. It was common for entire families to own only one or two complete changes of clothing, washing them at night and wearing them damp the next morning. Cleanliness was valued, but practicality often overruled comfort. As you move about, you perform the small rituals that keep the room livable. You fold bedding, stack it against the wall. You check the fire, coaxing the last embers into a weak flame. Coal dust blackens your fingers instantly. You don't bother wiping it off. Everyone's hands look like this. It's almost a uniform. Someone stirs fully now, and with that comes conversation. Quiet, efficient, stripped of unnecessary words. What needs doing today? Who might find work? Who will mind the youngest? Decisions are made quickly because lingering over them doesn't change the outcome. There's an unspoken understanding that today is not special yet. Christmas is close, but it hasn't arrived, and survival doesn't take holidays. You step outside again, and the contrast is immediate. The room may be cramped, but the street is unforgiving. Wind cuts between buildings, carrying the smell of the Thames, muddy, industrial, faintly rotten. London's river is both lifeline and threat, providing work and transport while quietly spreading disease. Cholera outbreaks are still a living memory in 1850, and scholars continue to debate how much the poor understood about contagion, versus how much they attributed illness to morality, miasma, or sheer bad luck. You make your way through familiar routes, passing faces you recognise but rarely greet. There's a strange etiquette among the poor. Too much friendliness invites obligation, and obligation is something no one can afford. Still, there's awareness. If someone hasn't been seen for days, people notice. If a child looks thinner than last week, people remember. Community exists here, but it's fragile, stretched thin by need. Work, when it comes, is unpredictable. You might carry goods, scrub floors, sell scraps, or wait endlessly for nothing at all. Employment is casual, temporary, and often degrading by design. Employers hold power not just over wages, but over dignity. A quirky but true detail. Some labourers were paid partly in beer, a practice justified as morale-boosting but criticised even then for keeping workers dependent and unhealthy. You don't get beer today. You get waiting. As the hours pass, hunger sharpens. You're used to it, but Christmas week makes it worse somehow. The city seems louder with preparation, carts rattling with food, shopkeepers calling out prices, children darting about with a nervous kind of excitement. You overhear conversations about puddings and roasts, about relatives visiting, about traditions. These words float past you like smoke, visible but untouchable. Eventually you return to the room, not because the day is done, but because there's nowhere else to go. Inside, the air feels heavier now, warmed slightly by bodies and the stubborn little fire. Someone has managed to acquire a bit of bread. It's divided carefully, almost ceremonially. No one takes more than their share. because fairness is one of the few things you can still control. You eat slowly, making it last. Food tastes different when it's scarce. Every texture amplified, every crumb accounted for. There's talk of Christmas plans, but they're tentative, spoken softly as if loud hope might break. Maybe a bit of meat if something comes through. Maybe a visit to church. Maybe nothing changes at all. There's a scholarly debate that hovers over scenes like this, though you wouldn't name it as such. Did the poor of Victorian London find joy in Christmas? Or was it largely a middle-class invention projected downward? Diaries and oral histories suggest both. Some remember warmth, song, and togetherness. Others recall only the stress of heightened expectations. Sitting here, you feel both possibilities existing at once. As evening approaches again, the light fades early. Candles are used sparingly, shadows stretch, making the room feel even smaller. Yet there's a subtle shift in mood. Someone hums a tune, barely audible. Someone else tells a story they've told before because repetition is comforting. These are not grand gestures, they are survival techniques. You settle back, listening to the building breathe around you once more. Tomorrow will be much like today, and the day after that. Christmas is coming, yes, but it will arrive inside this room, shaped by it, limited by it. You don't expect miracles, you expect endurance, and as you lie back down, wrapped in thin blankets and shared warmth, you realise that endurance, here, is its own quiet form of wealth. You wake earlier than yesterday, not because you want to, but because the city demands it. London doesn't run on alarms, it runs on opportunity, and opportunity favours the already moving. Before the sky has fully decided what colour it wants to be, you're upright, boots on, body already negotiating with fatigue. This is the rhythm of earning pennies before dawn. Arrive early, wait patiently, and hope someone with money notices you before the cold works its way too deep into your bones. Outside, the streets feel different at this hour. Quieter, yes, but also tense, like a held breath. Market stalls are half assembled, lanterns flickering as men and women unload crates with numb fingers. Horses stamp and snort, their breath visible, their handlers already shouting. You join a loose cluster of others like you, all pretending not to watch each other too closely. There's competition here, but also an unspoken agreement not to sabotage. Hunger makes enemies easily. Winter makes alliances necessary. You wait where work sometimes appears, near warehouses, near docks, near anywhere goods change hands. Day labour in Victorian London is a gamble. No contracts, no guarantees, no recourse if you're cheated. A historical fact that often surprises people. There were no minimum wages, no labour protections, and no expectation of consistent employment. Being willing wasn't enough. You had to be visible, strong enough, and lucky. Luck arrives in the form of a man with a clipboard and a scowl. He needs hands, briefly. You step forward with the others, posture straight, eyes alert. Being eager can look desperate. Being calm can look lazy. You aim for the narrow space between. You're chosen. Relief flickers through you, quickly replaced by calculation. How long will this last? What will it pay? Will it be enough to justify the energy it takes to do it? The work is simple and brutal. Lifting, hauling, stacking. Your muscles complain immediately, unused to consistency. Cold makes everything harder. Fingers lose precision, breath comes sharp. You don't stop. Stopping is how you get replaced. Around you, others work in silence, punctuated only by the occasional curse or barked instruction. There's no small talk. Words cost energy. As you work, your mind drifts. Not because you're careless, but because monotony invites it. You think about the room you left behind, about who's warm and who isn't. You think about Christmas inching closer, about the promise of it clashing with the reality of this moment. Victorian moralists often praised hard work as inherently uplifting, but standing here, spine aching, you can't help questioning that narrative. Scholars still argue whether the work ethic preached to the poor was meant to empower or simply to justify inequality. From where you stand, it mostly just hurts. Midway through the morning, there's a pause, not a break. Just a lull while instructions change. Someone produces a bit of bread from a pocket, gnaws at it quickly. You don't have any. That's fine. Hunger has become a familiar companion, like background noise you only notice when it stops. A quirky detail from the period. Some labourers deliberately worked on empty stomachs, believing, sometimes rightly, that it dulled hunger over time. You're not sure if that's science or superstition, but it feels true enough. The job ends as abruptly as it began. Coins are distributed, counted twice in your palm before being hidden deep in your coat. It's not much. It never is. Still, it's something tangible, something earned today. That matters more than you'd like to admit. There's dignity in earning, even when the system is designed to strip it away. You move on, scanning for more work, but the city has already decided how generous it will be. By midday, opportunity's thin. You walk, partly to stay warm, partly to stay hopeful. The streets are busier now, filled with shoppers and errand runners. Christmas decorations appear more frequently. Holly, ribbons, painted signs promising cheer. They feel almost mocking, but not entirely. There's comfort in knowing joy exists somewhere, even if it's not for you today. You pass a group of children selling matches, their voices hoarse from calling out. Child labour again, unavoidable, woven into every corner of the city. Reformers debate its morality fiercely in this era, but debates don't feed families. You don't judge them, you recognise them. In another life, another twist of fate, that could be you or someone you love. By afternoon the cold intensifies, dampness creeps in, settling in joints, making movement slower. You consider heading back early, conserving what little energy you have left. That calculation, spend energy to maybe earn more versus save energy to survive the night, is one you make constantly. There's no right answer, only consequences. On your way back, you stop briefly near a church where volunteers are setting up for seasonal charity. There are baskets, lists, whispered instructions. You don't approach. Not yet. Accepting charity is complicated. It can mean food, warmth, relief. It can also mean scrutiny, sermons, and the quiet erosion of pride. Victorian charity often came with moral strings attached, and recipients were expected to prove their worthiness. You're not sure you have the energy for that today. Back in the room, the coins make a soft, hopeful sound when placed on the table. Not celebration, just acknowledgement. Someone nods. Plans shift slightly. Maybe coal can last a bit longer tonight. Maybe bread tomorrow won't be quite so thin. These are victories measured in inches, not miles. As dust settles, exhaustion hits fully. Your body feels heavier than it should, like gravity has increased just for you. Yet there's also a strange satisfaction humming beneath it. You contributed today. You endured. In this world, that counts. You sit, listening to the familiar sounds return, the building, the breathing, the distant bells starting up again. Tomorrow will demand the same from you, and the day after that. Christmas is closer now, close enough to feel real, but still not close enough to change anything yet. You lean back, eyes closing for a moment, letting the ache settle. This is what surviving looks like here. Not triumph, not despair, but persistence. And for now, persistence is enough to carry you into the night. Morning brings with it a different kind of weight today. Not physical, not entirely. You feel it before anyone speaks, before the first movement stirs the air. It's the weight of decisions waiting to be made, the kind that don't announce themselves as dramatic but leave marks all the same. In a household like this, choices aren't about what you want. They're about what you can afford to postpone. Someone clears their throat and conversation begins in that careful, economical way you've perfected over time. The fire is discussed first. Coal is running low. Do you keep it going steadily and risk running out before Christmas? Or let it fade now and save warmth for later? Then food. Bread is counted. There's talk of thinning soup again tonight, stretching it with more water, fewer vegetables. No one complains. Complaints imply alternatives. This is the part of poverty that rarely makes it into stories, the constant mental arithmetic. Victorian social investigators often focused on wages and rent, but less on the exhaustion of calculation itself. Every decision carries consequence, and mistakes are expensive. Scholars still debate how much this cognitive burden contributed to the cycles of poverty, but living inside it, you feel the toll daily. It's not just hunger that wears you down, it's thinking. You listen as plans form, shift, dissolve. Someone suggests selling an item, a spare blanket perhaps, or a cooking pot rarely used. The suggestion hangs in the air, heavy. Selling possessions is never just transactional. Each object represents future security, however small. You weigh warmth now against hunger later. You weigh dignity against necessity. Eventually the idea is set aside, not because it's wrong, but because today it feels like too much to give up. Outside, the city continues its relentless motion. You step out again, partly to escape the tension of decision-making, partly to see if the day offers anything new. The streets are louder now, fuller. Christmas draws people out, even those who can barely afford it. There's a sense of urgency in the air, as if everyone is racing an invisible clock. You pass a butcher's shop and slow, despite yourself. A goose hangs in the window, plump and pale, dressed with sprigs of greenery. It's a powerful symbol in this era, middle-class prosperity distilled into feathers and fat. A historical fact worth noting. Goose became the Christmas centrepiece for many working families, not because it was cheap, but because it could feed many when pulled through savings clubs. You don't belong to one. Still, the image lingers. Someone brushes past you, muttering an apology. The crowd thickens near the markets, where noise and colour briefly overpower the cold. You don't browse. Browsing implies spending. Still, you observe. You watch how others choose, how they hesitate, how they argue quietly over prices. Poverty is not a single experience here. It's a spectrum. You're somewhere on it, aware of those below you and those just above. By midday, you find yourself back near familiar corners, familiar faces. News travels quickly in these spaces. Someone has fallen ill. Someone didn't make rent. Someone's child was taken to the workhouse infirmary. These updates are exchanged without embellishment. There's no room for drama when reality is already heavy enough. Illness especially carries fear. In winter, it spreads fast, and treatment is unreliable at best. Victorian medicine is improving, but for the poor, access remains limited and often dangerous. You return home earlier than planned, drawn by the need to be part of the decisions rather than avoid them. Inside, the room feels smaller today, crowded not just with bodies, but with unspoken worries. A discussion resumes, this time about Christmas itself. Do you try to mark it in some way, or do you treat it like any other day? Both options carry risk. Celebration costs resources. Ignoring it costs morale. There's a quirky tradition that surfaces in the conversation, the idea of a treat, something small but special, an orange perhaps, a bit of sugar. In Victorian London, oranges were seasonal luxuries, their bright colour and scent symbolising festivity more than nourishment. You consider the idea seriously. It's astonishing how powerful something so small can feel when everything else is scarce. The debate circles. Someone worries about expectations, especially for the children. Once you promise joy, you're obligated to deliver it. There's an unspoken fear of disappointment lingering beneath every suggestion. Childhood here is fragile, easily hardened by reality. You want to protect what softness remains, but you're not sure how. As the afternoon fades, light slants through the grimy window, illuminating dust and breath. The fire is coaxed back to life briefly, enough to take the edge off the cold. You sit close, hands extended, feeling heat reach you unevenly. Comfort, like everything else, must be shared carefully. Conversation shifts, drifting toward memories. Someone recalls a Christmas from years ago, before things worsened, before illness or loss reshaped the household. The story isn't told with bitterness, but with a kind of quiet disbelief, as if remembering a life lived by someone else. These moments matter. They remind you that circumstances change, sometimes for the worse, but also that they once changed for the better. There's an academic debate that hovers invisibly over scenes like this. Was Victorian family life among the poor primarily a site of trauma or resilience? The answer, inconveniently, is both. Sitting here, you feel the strain, yes, but you also feel connection. People endure not alone, but together, bound by necessity and affection. As evening approaches, the final decisions of the day are made. The fire will be kept low, the soup will be stretched, no possessions will be sold, yet. The possibility remains, hovering in the future like a threat politely waiting its turn. You settle in as darkness fully claims the room. Candles are lit sparingly, casting long shadows that dance on the walls. Someone hums again, that same tune from before, a quiet thread of continuity. It's not happiness exactly, but it's steadiness. You lean back, feeling the day's mental exhaustion sink deeper than any physical ache. These choices, these compromises, They define survival as much as labour does. Tomorrow will bring new calculations, new pressures. Christmas is closer still, its promise both comforting and intimidating. For now, you breathe. You sit. You endure another day of impossible choices, made possible only by the fact that you're still here to make them. The children wake differently than adults do. Where you rise with calculation and stiffness, they surface abruptly, as if pulled upward by instinct rather than obligation. One of them sits up too fast and immediately regrets it, swaying slightly before finding balance. There's a pause, a moment where you all watch to see if sickness follows. It doesn't. Relief passes quietly through the room, unacknowledged but shared. They are small, but not fragile in the way people imagine childhood. Not here. Their hands are already roughened by work, their knees permanently bruised, their vocabulary shaped as much by markets and streets as by stories. A historical fact that still unsettles modern historians. By 1850, it was common for working-class children in London to contribute a significant portion of the household income, sometimes more than adults whose health had already been worn down. Childhood, in this world, is a phase you move through quickly or not at all. You watch them dress, movements practiced and efficient. There's no dawdling, no playful resistance to the day. They know better. Time wasted is opportunity lost, and opportunity is the currency of survival. One of them glances toward you, eyes sharp with a question they don't ask. Will there be work today? You don't answer, not because you won't, but because you can't yet. Outside, they blend into the morning streets with unsettling ease. Children selling matches, sweeping crossings, carrying messages. London runs partly on their labour, and it barely notices them unless they cause trouble. Reformers argue passionately about this, publishing pamphlets and delivering speeches. Meanwhile, the children work. The debate exists somewhere above their heads, theoretical and distant. You follow at a slower pace, watching them disappear into the flow of the city. There's pride there, tangled with fear. You don't want this life for them, but you also depend on it. That contradiction sits heavy, one of the many quiet moral compromises poverty demands. Scholars still argue whether early responsibility hardened children prematurely or gave them resilience. Watching them now, you suspect it does both, and neither outcome feels fair. The day unfolds unevenly. You find a bit of work. Nothing steady, nothing secure. The children return briefly, faces flushed from cold and effort, coins clutched tightly. It's not much, but they hand it over without hesitation. That gesture carries weight. It shifts the balance of the room, redistributing power in subtle ways. Authority here is fluid, shaped by who brings something in that day. By afternoon, exhaustion settles over them like an early dusk. They lean against walls, sit on steps when they think no one is watching. Hunger sharpens their edges. You offer what you can. Encouragement, reassurance, the promise that Christmas is coming. You're careful how you say it. Too much enthusiasm sounds false. Too little sounds cruel. There's a quirky detail from the period that surfaces in moments like this. Children often measured time not by calendars but by events. Paydays, market days, holidays. Christmas looms large in that mental map not because of gifts but because it represents interruption. School, work, routine, all might pause, if only briefly. The idea of a pause is intoxicating. Back in the room, as evening approaches again, the children's energy flickers unpredictably. They laugh at something trivial, then argue fiercely over nothing. Emotions run close to the surface when bodies are tired and underfed. You intervene gently, aware that discipline here isn't about control but preservation. Too much harshness breaks spirits. Too little invites chaos. Someone suggests telling a story, and the idea takes hold. Stories are free. They cost nothing but breath and attention. You choose one that's been told before, because familiarity is soothing. As you speak, you watch their faces soften, eyes growing heavy. For a moment, they are not workers or contributors or burdens. They are just children, suspended in narrative. This is where Victorian sentimentality and reality briefly overlap. Middle-class writers of the era loved to romanticize poor children as symbols of innocence or tragedy. But those portrayals rarely captured this balance. Capable, exhausted, imaginative, practical. Sitting here, you see the whole picture. You don't have the luxury of myth. As night deepens, the children curl up wherever there's space, limbs tangled, breaths uneven. You adjust a blanket, tuck it more securely around a small shoulder. These gestures matter. They are investments in tomorrow, however uncertain tomorrow may be. There's an ongoing academic debate about emotional bonds in impoverished families, whether constant stress weakens them or strengthens them. Again, the answer refuses to be simple. Love here is quieter, less indulgent, but no less real. You sit for a while after they sleep, listening to the room settle. Outside, the city continues, indifferent and immense. Inside, the world is contained within four walls and a few fragile lives. Christmas feels closer now, not as an abstract date, but as something the children are already leaning toward, emotionally if not materially. You think about what you can do for them. Not grand gestures, just something to mark the time, to tell them this season is different, that it means something beyond cold and work. The pressure of that responsibility weighs on you more than any physical labour today. Eventually fatigue claims you too. You lie back, careful not to disturb anyone, and stare at the ceiling until the dark blurs your thoughts. Tomorrow will come early. The children will wake ready to work again. Childhood will continue to slip past them, quietly, efficiently. As sleep finally takes you, one thought lingers. You may not be able to give them ease, or abundance, or safety, but you can give them continuity, presence, a sense that even in this hard world, they are seen and needed. In Victorian London, that may be the closest thing to a gift that truly lasts. The cough starts as a background sound, easy to ignore because it's always been there in some form. In this city, coughing is practically a dialect. Coal smoke coats lungs, damp chills bones, and everyone hacks a little, especially in winter. But this one lingers, deeper and wetter than usual, and you notice it the way you notice a loose step on familiar stairs. Subtle, but unsettling. You listen more carefully as the morning unfolds. Each breath sounds like work. Someone tries to suppress it, turning away, as if politeness might make it disappear. It doesn't. Illness has no regard for manners. In 1850 London, respiratory disease is a constant threat, and tuberculosis, then called consumption, haunts every poor household like a rumour waiting to prove itself true. A historical fact that lands heavily. Consumption is responsible for roughly 1 in 5 deaths in Victorian cities at mid-century. The air inside the room feels thicker today. Coal smoke from neighbouring fires seeps through walls, mixing with damp and breath. You crack the window despite the cold, a compromise between warmth and air. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much Victorian families understood the health risks of poor ventilation. They didn't know about bacteria yet, but they understood, intuitively, that stale air felt dangerous. You act on that instinct now. The city outside is wrapped in its usual grey, chimneys coughing in unison. You step out briefly to fetch water, the cold biting sharper than yesterday. As you walk, you hear it everywhere. Coughs echoing in alleys, on stairwells, in passing carts. This is what industrial progress sounds like at ground level. Factories mean jobs, yes, but they also mean lungs slowly turning against their owners. Back inside, the cough worsens. You exchange glances with the others. No one says the word doctor. Doctors cost money, and for the poor, their treatments are often as dangerous as the disease. Bleeding, purging, tonics heavy with alcohol or worse. There's a fringe belief, surprisingly common, that illness can be sweated out by keeping the patient hot and wrapped tight. You consider this, weighing it against the risk of overheating already strained lungs. Christmas makes everything more complicated. If this were any other week, decisions might feel easier, or at least more routine. But illness now threatens not just health, but plans, hopes, the fragile build-up of meaning around the holiday. You feel a spike of fear. Not dramatic, just sharp and practical. What if this gets worse? What if work stops? What if the children catch it? You assign small tasks, trying to keep the room functioning without exhausting anyone further. Water is warmed, soup is made thinner but hotter. The fire is kept slightly higher than planned, a sacrifice you tell yourself is temporary. Coal is burned faster. You don't count the pieces. Counting would make it real. As the day drags on, the cough ebbs and flows. Moments of quiet raise hope, only to be followed by harsh reminders. You sit close, offering what comfort you can. Presence, a steady hand, the reassurance of routine. Victorian families often relied on home care during illness, not just out of necessity but out of mistrust of institutions. Workhouse infirmaries in particular are feared places, associated with separation and neglect. There's a quirky remedy someone mentions, half joking, half serious. A spoonful of treacle before bed, said to soothe the chest. Treacle is cheap and thick, and whether or not it works medically, it feels like doing something. You make a note of it, already planning how to stretch what little you have to include this small comfort. Outside, bells ring again, their sound muffled by fog. They're announcing a service, or a time, or simply reminding the city of order. Inside the room, time feels suspended, measured instead by breaths and coughs. You think about how illness reshapes households, turning everyone into caretakers and watchful sentries. There's no room for denial. Everyone is alert now, listening. As evening comes, the children grow quieter than usual. They sense the shift, even if they don't fully understand it. You distract them with simple tasks, with stories, with the promise of tomorrow. Children in Victorian London are intimately familiar with sickness. Death is not an abstract concept for them. You're careful not to let fear show. Calm here is a skill. There's an academic argument that illness was a social equalizer in the 19th century, affecting rich and poor alike. Sitting here, you find that claim hollow. Yes, disease crosses class lines, but its outcomes do not. The wealthy have space, care, and options. You have vigilance and hope. Night settles heavily. The cough softens, becomes less frequent. Relief trickles in, cautious and incomplete. You don't celebrate. You've learned better. You prepare for sleep in shifts, ensuring someone is always half awake, listening. This is how nights are spent during illness. Not resting, but waiting. You lie back eventually, eyes open in the dark, counting breaths that aren't your own. The room smells of coal, soup, damp wool, and worry. Christmas is close enough now that you can almost feel it pressing against the walls, impatient. You wonder briefly if the season itself adds pressure to survive, or if survival simply feels louder against the backdrop of expectation. As the hours pass, the cough fades into a rough, uneven rhythm. Not gone, but manageable. For tonight, that's enough. You let your body relax slightly, knowing full well that tomorrow may undo this fragile balance. In Victorian London, health is never guaranteed, and recovery is rarely linear. But as you drift towards sleep, you cling to this small mercy. The night has not taken more than it already has. The cough doesn't vanish overnight, but it loosens its grip just enough to let the day begin without panic. Morning arrives muted, filtered through fog that presses against the window like damp cotton. You wake slowly, listening first, cataloguing sounds before you move, breathing, still rough but steady. Relief settles in your chest, careful and conditional. In this life, you never assume improvement is permanent. You take what you're given and keep watching. Christmas is no longer an idea hovering in the future. It's close now, days, not weeks, and that proximity changes how people move. There's a subtle shift in the streets, a kind of nervous brightness. Shopkeepers hang extra greenery. Hawkers shout a little louder. Even those with very little seem determined to acknowledge the season somehow, as if ignoring it would invite bad luck. Inside the room, the atmosphere mirrors that tension. Energy is low, but attention is sharp. You ration tasks more carefully today, mindful of lingering illness. The children are kept closer, given smaller errands, not out of indulgence but strategy. A setback now would be disastrous. Victorian households often operated like this during winter, constantly adjusting labour and rest in response to health. Survival wasn't rigid, it was responsive. You step outside mid-morning, drawn by the sound of a nearby market. The fog thins slightly as the day warms, revealing stalls crowded with people and goods. This is where Christmas becomes unavoidable. There are baskets of apples, strings of onions, wheels of cheese, and most tantalising puddings wrapped tightly in cloth, steaming faintly in the cold air. The smells hit you first, rich and layered, making hunger flare sharply. You don't linger long, but you do linger longer than usual. There's a historical truth here that's easy to forget. Even the poorest Londoners participated in Christmas markets, not necessarily as buyers, but as witnesses. Seeing abundance was part of the ritual, even if it came with envy and restraint. Some scholars argue that this exposure intensified feelings of deprivation. Others suggest it reinforced communal rhythm. Standing here, you feel both interpretations tug at you. A vendor calls out a price for oranges, and you pause. Oranges are expensive, imported, and utterly impractical. They're also symbolic, bright, fragrant, undeniably festive. You do the math in your head. It would mean sacrificing something else, something sensible. Coal, bread, soap. The internal debate is brief but fierce. You walk on, not today, maybe tomorrow, maybe not at all. As you make your way back, you notice small acts of preparation everywhere. A woman scrubs her doorstep with unusual care. A man patches a coat instead of selling it. Children practice carols off-key, laughing when they mess up. These gestures don't change material conditions, but they reshape emotional ones. Christmas here is less about what you have and more about how you frame what you lack. Back in the room, conversation turns inevitably toward the holiday itself. Someone asks quietly what day it is. You answer, and there's a collective intake of breath. So close now. Plans are revisited. Again. Soup will be made richer that day if possible. The fire will be allowed to burn longer. Work will be attempted early just in case. No one mentions gifts outright, but the thought hovers, especially where the children are concerned. There's a quirky tradition that resurfaces in the discussion. Saving the best bits for Christmas. A knob of fat, a pinch of spice, a heel of bread dried carefully for stuffing. Victorian cookbooks aimed at the poor emphasise this practice, encouraging households to elevate ordinary ingredients through timing and imagination. You feel a small surge of pride realising you've been doing this instinctively all along. The afternoon is spent in preparation that looks, from the outside, like very little. Cleaning, mending, organising. These tasks carry more weight now, imbued with purpose. The room begins to feel slightly different. Not larger, not warmer, but intentional. Even illness seems to retreat a step, cowed by the collective focus on getting through the next few days intact. As dusk approaches, the bells ring again, louder somehow, clearer through thinning fog. You pause to listen. There's comfort in their regularity, in the way they anchor time when everything else feels unstable. Victorian Londoners relied heavily on these auditory markers. Clocks were luxuries, bells were communal. Tonight they mark not just the hour, but the narrowing distance between now and Christmas morning. The children grow restless as darkness falls, energy bubbling up unexpectedly. Anticipation does that. You let it happen, within reason. Laughter breaks out over something small, a mispronounced word, a remembered story. It feels fragile like glass, but you don't stop it. Joy, here, is rare and fleeting. When it appears, you make room. There's an academic debate about whether holidays like Christmas genuinely improved morale among the poor, or merely heightened awareness of inequality. Listening to the children now, you suspect morale doesn't need to be permanent to be valuable. Even a few hours of excitement can recalibrate the spirit, remind it what it's capable of feeling. Later, as quiet returns, you sit with your thoughts. You think about what Christmas means in this context. Not abundance, not rest, but recognition. A shared acknowledgement that life is hard and still worth marking, that endurance deserves a pause, however brief, that time itself can be honoured, even when resources can't. You check on the cough once more. It's still there, but subdued. Another small mercy. You add it to the list of things you're grateful for, though you'd never phrase it that way aloud. Gratitude here is practical, not performative. It's noticing what hasn't gone wrong yet. As you settle in for the night, the city hums differently. There's an undercurrent of anticipation, a collective holding of breath. Tomorrow will bring more preparation, more calculation, more risk. But tonight, there's a sense of forward motion. Not progress exactly, but approach. Christmas is coming. Not as rescue, not as reward, but as a moment. And in Victorian London, moments like that are sometimes all you get. You close your eyes, letting that thought carry you gently into sleep, ready to face whatever the next day demands. The markets are louder today, as if the city itself has decided to raise its voice before winter steals it back. You step into the noise reluctantly, already aware of how much wanting costs. Christmas is close enough now that restraint feels heavier than hunger. Every stall seems designed to test you, bright colours against grey air, smells engineered to linger, voices calling out promises you know better than to believe. You move slowly, deliberately, scanning for what might be possible rather than what is desirable. This is a skill you've honed over years, converting fantasy into feasibility in real time. A historical fact sits quietly beneath the bustle. By 1850, London's food markets were some of the most complex in the world, capable of feeding millions, yet access to that food was entirely dictated by cash in hand. Abundance and deprivation exist side by side, touching but never mixing. You stop near a stall selling scraps, offcuts of meat, bones with just enough clinging to them to justify a price. This is where many poor families shop, though few admit it. There's no shame here, only pragmatism. A bone can flavour a pot, fat can be rendered, nothing is wasted. Victorian urban cookery is an art of extraction, pulling sustenance from what others discard. The vendor eyes you, then names a price. You counter, quietly. Negotiation is expected, but it's a delicate dance. Push too hard and you're labelled troublesome. Accept too quickly and you lose leverage. You meet in the middle. Coins change hands. The transaction is small, but it feels momentous. This will be the centrepiece of your Christmas meal, modest though it is. As you move on, you pass children staring at toys displayed outside a shop. Wooden horses, dolls with painted faces, tin soldiers arranged in neat ranks. These are not meant for them. They know that. Still, they look. A quirky detail from the era. Many toy shops displayed items more for spectacle than sale, understanding that desire itself drew crowds. You feel a familiar ache watching the children's faces, carefully blank, betraying only the smallest flicker of longing. You consider buying something small, a ribbon, a carved trinket, but the thought of explaining the missing money later stops you. Gifts here must justify themselves twice, emotionally and financially. You keep walking, repeating the numbers in your head like a mantra. Coal, bread, rent, everything else is secondary. On your way back, you pass a charity table set up near a church. Volunteers stand behind it, clean and earnest, handing out pamphlets and the occasional parcel. You slow, torn. Accepting charity now could ease tomorrow. It could also bring scrutiny, questions, perhaps a sermon you don't have the patience for. Victorian charity is rarely anonymous. It often comes with an expectation of gratitude and moral improvement. Scholars still debate whether these practices helped alleviate poverty or reinforce social hierarchies. Right now, you just feel tired. You don't stop. Not yet. Pride isn't the right word. It's timing. You want to see what you can manage on your own first. That impulse, self-reliance even in desperation, is deeply ingrained, praised by society and punished by reality in equal measure. Back in the room, the bone is received with quiet approval. It's cleaned carefully, wrapped, set aside like something precious. Planning begins immediately. How to cook it, how to stretch it, how to make it feel like more than it is. Someone suggests adding dried herbs saved from summer. Someone else remembers a neighbour who might have an onion to spare. Community networks activate subtly, favours weighed and traded without formal acknowledgement. The children hover nearby, curious but cautious. They sense the importance of what you've brought back, even if they don't fully understand it. You don't announce it as a Christmas thing. You let them discover that slowly. Anticipation is part of the gift. The afternoon is spent in small preparations, cleaning the pot, mending clothes so they'll look better on the day itself. These acts carry symbolic weight now, transforming the ordinary into something almost ceremonial. There's an open academic question about how ritual functions under conditions of scarcity, whether it provides genuine psychological relief or merely masks stress. Sitting here, hands busy, you find relief in the doing. That's enough. As evening falls, the room smells faintly of soap and coal and something else. Hope, maybe, or at least intention. The cough is checked again, still present but manageable. You factor that into your plans. Everything has a contingency now. Outside, the city grows brighter with candlelight. Windows glow. Carols drift unevenly through the air, some voices strong, others barely audible. Music doesn't erase inequality, but it does level something, if only the soundscape. For a moment everyone hears the same notes. You sit back, exhausted but focused. Tomorrow will bring more decisions, more temptations, more tests. But today you secured something tangible for Christmas. Not abundance, not security, but enough to mark the day, to say this time is different. In Victorian London, that distinction matters. You can't stop the machinery of poverty. but you can occasionally wedge something human into its gears. You breathe out slowly, feeling the weight of the coins you no longer have and the heavier weight of responsibility you still carry. The market noise fades from memory as night settles in. The bone rests quietly, waiting. Christmas is almost here, and with it, the fragile promise that for one day, survival might include something like celebration. Charity doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives awkwardly, clearing its throat, pretending not to notice how much it's needed. You encounter it again the next morning, this time closer, harder to avoid. A neighbour mentions the church is distributing Christmas parcels today. Bread, maybe a bit of meat, a candle if supplies last. The information is delivered casually, but the implication lands heavy. This is the window. Miss it, and there may not be another. You weigh the decision longer than you should. Pride is part of it, yes, but so is experience. Charity in Victorian London often comes wrapped in assessment. Are you sober? Are you industrious? Are you grateful enough? The poor are expected to perform deservingness, to prove their suffering aligns with acceptable narratives. Scholars continue to debate whether these systems offered relief or reinforced moral surveillance. Standing here, you feel both possibilities pressing in. Eventually, practicality wins. Christmas is tomorrow. You can't eat principles. You pull on your coat and step back into the street, the city already alive with movement. Others are heading the same direction, drawn by the same rumour, faces set with similar expressions. Determination edged with discomfort. No one speaks much. There's a shared understanding that this is not a social outing. The church hall is colder than you expect. Stone walls hold winter like a grudge. Volunteers move briskly, efficient but distant, their smiles practiced. You join the line, hands clasped to keep them from shaking. Not from cold, but from the strange vulnerability of asking without words. This is the moment where dignity feels most fragile. A historical fact sits uncomfortably here. Many Victorian charities required attendance at religious services in exchange for aid, blurring the line between assistance and obligation. Today, you're spared that, though a brief prayer is offered before distribution begins. You bow your head, not in protest or devotion, but in concentration. Get through this. Don't draw attention. When your turn comes, questions are minimal. Name, address, number of children. The answers reduce your life to a list, manageable and impersonal. A parcel is placed in your hands, heavier than you expected. You thank them, because that's the script, and step aside quickly, heart pounding. Relief rushes in, followed immediately by something harder to name. Gratitude. Yes. Also a quiet resentment that relief requires this ritual. Outside, you don't open the parcel right away. You walk a few steps, letting the moment settle. Others do the same, glancing around before peeking inside, as if the contents might judge them. When you finally look, you find bread, a small cut of meat, and, unexpectedly, a candle. The candle catches you off guard. Light is a luxury. Light is time extended. Back in the room, the reaction is mixed but unmistakably positive. Supplies are laid out, assessed, incorporated into plans already forming. The bone from the market and the meat from the parcel are compared, combined mentally into something approaching a feast. There's no celebration yet, but the mood shifts perceptibly. The margins have widened, just enough to breathe. The children are curious, asking questions you half answer. You don't want to emphasize where the food came from, only that it's here. There's an ongoing debate among historians about whether charity undermines self-worth among recipients. Watching the children now, you're less concerned with theory than with outcome. Tomorrow will be better fed than it might have been. That's what matters. As afternoon fades, you prepare what you can in advance. Bread is set aside carefully. Meat is wrapped, guarded like treasure. The candle is placed somewhere safe, its presence alone changing the room's feel. It promises warmth that isn't just physical. Outside, bells ring longer tonight, more insistently. The city is leaning into Christmas now, whether it can afford to or not. Carols float through the air again, clearer, closer. You recognise one and hum along under your breath. Music doesn't ask questions. It doesn't care how you got here. There's a quirky detail from the period that surfaces as you hum. Some carols were considered too rowdy for church and were sung exclusively in streets and homes. Christmas soundscapes were contested spaces, shaped as much by class as by faith. Tonight, those boundaries blur. Everyone hears the same chorus drifting through the fog. As night deepens, the room grows quieter. Anticipation replaces anxiety, not entirely, but enough to soften it. You review plans one last time. Wake early, cook slowly. Let the children sleep in if possible. These are small luxuries, but they feel earned. You sit back, exhaustion heavy but not crushing. Charity has complicated your emotions, but it's also altered your reality. There will be food tomorrow. There will be light. In Victorian London, that combination is no small thing. You lie down, the parcel's contents safely stowed, the candle unlit but imagined. Christmas is hours away now. Whatever it brings, you've done what you can to meet it prepared, dignity intact enough to carry you through the day. The workhouse looms in your thoughts long before it ever appears in front of you. It's not a place you visit casually. It's a presence, an idea, a threat that keeps people moving even when their bodies beg them to stop. In winter, especially this close to Christmas, its shadow stretches longer. You hear it mentioned more often now, slipped into conversations like a warning rather than a destination. If things get worse, if the rent isn't paid, if there's nowhere else. You've seen it before, from a distance. High walls, narrow windows, an architecture designed not for comfort, but for correction. A historical fact worth lingering on. By 1850, the new poor law had firmly established workhouses as the primary form of state relief, intentionally harsh to deter all but the desperate. Families were separated upon entry, men, women and children housed apart, sometimes permanently. Relief came at the price of unity. That knowledge shapes your decisions even when no one says the word aloud. Every calculation, coal, food, work, charity, is partly about staying out of that system. Independence here isn't romantic, it's defensive. The workhouse represents the line where survival becomes institutional, regulated, stripped of choice. Scholars still debate whether it reduced poverty or simply managed it out of sight. For those living on the edge, the debate is academic. The fear is practical. You walk past the building today not because you need to, but because the street curves that way. You don't slow, you don't look directly at it. Still, you feel it. The quiet, disciplined stillness behind the walls. No shouting, no music. Even the air feels restrained. The contrast with the rest of the city preparing for Christmas is stark, almost obscene. Inside your room later, the workhouse enters conversation obliquely. Someone mentions a family down the street who went in last week. Father injured, rent unpaid, children separated. The story is told without embellishment, but the implications ripple outward. It's a reminder of how thin the margin really is. One injury, one illness, one missed payment. The children listen, pretending not to. You watch their faces carefully. You don't want fear to take root there, but you also won't lie. Victorian children learned early what institutions existed to catch them if they fell, and how painful that catching could be. There's an open, scholarly debate about whether this awareness fostered resilience or anxiety. You suspect it fostered both, unevenly distributed across young shoulders. Christmas Eve approaches now, and with it, a strange intensification of everything. The city feels fuller, louder, brighter. Even the poorest streets seem to glow faintly with borrowed light. Candles in windows, scraps of greenery nailed to doors. These gestures don't erase hardship, but they push back against it, if only symbolically. Against the workhouse especially, they feel like acts of quiet rebellion. You make final preparations with renewed focus. The food is checked again. The candle is guarded like a promise. The fire is planned carefully, when to stoke it, when to let it fade. These decisions carry extra weight now, sharpened by the knowledge of what failure looks like. You're not just planning a meal, you're defending a way of life, however precarious. Outside, bells ring for evening service. You don't attend. Many don't. Churches are full tonight, but faith takes many forms here. For some, it's prayer. For others, it's persistence. You sit instead, listening to the sound drift through the walls, grounding yourself in the familiar rhythm. There's a quirky but telling detail from the era that crosses your mind. Workhouses often served better food on Christmas Day, a gesture meant to demonstrate benevolence. The irony is sharp. Generosity offered only after freedom is surrendered. You think about that as you stir the pot slowly, deliberately, savouring the autonomy of the act. As night settles fully, the city outside hums with anticipation. Somewhere, laughter spills from a pub. Somewhere else, a family like yours counts candles and coins. The workhouse stands silent through it all, unmoved, uncelebrating. It doesn't care what day it is. Inside, you gather everyone close for the night. There's no speech, no formal acknowledgement of what tomorrow means. You don't need one. The awareness is shared, woven into glances and gestures. Staying together, staying here, is the unspoken goal. You lie down with the image of the workhouse fading slightly, pushed back by the immediate tangible reality of the room around you. You've avoided it another day. That counts. In Victorian London, avoiding the worst can feel like winning. Christmas Eve gives way to sleep and with it a fragile sense of safety. Tomorrow will test it, but tonight you rest knowing you are still outside those walls, still making choices however constrained. For now, that is enough to carry you into the longest night of the year. Christmas Eve night bleeds quietly into Christmas morning, marked less by celebration than by interruption. You wake before dawn, not to bells or excitement, but to habit. The body doesn't know it's a holiday. It knows cold, hunger, and routine. Still, there's a difference in the air. Subtle but undeniable, like the pause before a familiar song begins. For a moment you lie still, listening. The room breathes around you, sleeping bodies, the faint crackle of dying embers, the distant rumble of the city shifting in its sleep. Then the bells begin, softer at first, then clearer, rolling through fog and brick, announcing Christmas with calm authority. Religion, in Victorian London, has excellent timing. It knows when to speak. Church bells don't just mark hours here, they assert order. They remind you that meaning exists, that time is structured, that suffering fits somewhere into a larger design. This is both comfort and control, depending on where you're standing. Scholars still debate whether faith offered genuine psychological refuge to the poor, or served primarily as a framework that normalized endurance. Listening now, you feel both interpretations resonate. Someone stirs, eyes open. There's a shared glance. Today is different. Not easier, not magically transformed, but distinct. You rise quietly and tend to the fire, coaxing it back to life with care. Coal is precious, but this is the day you planned for. You allow yourself that small indulgence. Warmth spreads unevenly, touching hands, faces, hope. The children wake next, slower than usual, blinking as if the light itself has changed. You don't rush them. That's the gift this morning. Time. A historical fact that often gets lost in sentimentality. Many working families did try to reduce or eliminate labour on Christmas Day, even when it meant financial loss. Rest, however brief, carried cultural weight. You prepare the meal gradually, savouring the process. The bone simmers, releasing its promise into the pot. The added meat feels almost extravagant now, the result of careful planning and reluctant charity. Bread is sliced thicker than usual. The room fills with smell, real smell, not imagined, and that alone alters everyone's posture. Backs straighten, faces soften. Before eating there's a pause. Not a formal prayer, but something adjacent. Someone murmurs thanks, to God perhaps, or simply to circumstance. Faith here is practical. It adapts. You don't analyse it too closely. You just accept the quiet moment as part of the ritual, as necessary as the fire. Religion on Christmas in Victorian London is unavoidable, even for those who rarely attend church. Sermons echo through open doors, hymns drift down streets, posters proclaim redemption and mercy. For the poor, these messages are double-edged. They promise hope, yes, but also patience, obedience, acceptance. You take what you need from them and leave the rest behind. The meal is eaten slowly. Every bite is noticed, appreciated. The children chew carefully, eyes wide, as if afraid the food might vanish if they don't pay attention. You let them eat their fill before taking more yourself. There's no discussion about fairness today. Today, the rules bend slightly. Conversation begins tentatively, then loosens. Someone jokes, soft, self-aware humour that acknowledges the absurdity of celebrating under these conditions. Laughter follows, surprising in its ease. It doesn't last long, but it doesn't need to. It proves something important. Joy hasn't been entirely priced out of your lives. There's a quirky belief circulating in this era that what you do on Christmas Day sets the tone for the year ahead. You're careful, then, with your actions. You keep voices kind. You avoid arguments. You tell the children stories instead of instructions. Superstition or not, the idea carries power. Intention matters. Later you light the candle. It burns steadily, casting a warm, golden glow that transforms the room. Shadows soften, edges blur. Light has a way of doing that, of making things feel more forgiving. For a while, the outside world recedes. The workhouse, the debts, the cold, all held at bay by a single flame. You consider attending church briefly. Many do, dressed in their best, even if their best is threadbare. Church on Christmas is as much about visibility as faith, being seen, being counted, being part of something larger. But the thought of the cold pews, the long service, the moral undertones gives you pause. You decide against it. Faith doesn't require an audience. There's an ongoing academic debate about whether organised religion empowered working-class communities or reinforced social hierarchies by promoting submission. Sitting here, candlelight flickering, you feel less interested in conclusions than in outcomes. Right now, religion has given you a shared language for gratitude and restraint. That's enough. The afternoon passes quietly. The children play with nothing in particular, inventing games out of gestures and words. You watch them, thinking about how Christmas stories often focus on gifts, when what lingers longer are these stretches of unclaimed time, time without demand, time without threat. Outside, bells ring again, marking the day's slow progression. You don't rush to respond. Today, you let time move around you instead of dragging you with it. That, too, feels radical. As dusk approaches, the candle burns low. You don't replace it. Letting it end feels appropriate, like closing a chapter gently. The fire is allowed to fade as well, returning the room gradually to its familiar chill. Tomorrow will bring routine back with it. You don't fight that knowledge, you just don't invite it early. Before sleep, there's another quiet moment. Someone mentions the year ahead, cautiously. No grand resolutions, just hopes phrased as possibilities, steady work, fewer illnesses, maybe a little extra saved. These are humble wishes, grounded in reality. That doesn't make them small. You lie down, Christmas Day nearly spent, feeling fuller than you have in weeks. Not just from food, though that helps, from connection. From having marked the day on your own terms, however constrained they were. Religion offered structure. Community offered warmth. You offered effort. Together they shaped a Christmas that didn't erase hardship but acknowledged humanity within it. As sleep takes you, the bells fade into memory. Tomorrow, the city will resume its demands. But tonight, you rest with the knowledge that you endured the day, found meaning where you could, and remained yourself in a world that constantly asks you to be less. Christmas morning gives way to afternoon almost without ceremony, the way all good things seem to, quietly, without asking permission. The meal has been eaten, the candle burned down to a stub, and what remains now is an unfamiliar sensation, aftermath. Not emptiness exactly, but a gentle letdown, like the tide pulling back after briefly reaching higher ground. You notice it first in the children. Their excitement fades unevenly, replaced by a restless uncertainty. They don't complain, they don't ask for more, they simply hover, waiting to see what comes next. Christmas has happened. Now what? For families like yours, this moment can be harder than the anticipation. The pause afterward exposes how temporary the softness was. You redirect them gently, suggesting games, stories, small tasks. Structure returns, not as a burden, but as reassurance. Routine is a comfort here, a known quantity. Victorian social observers often misunderstood this, assuming monotony crushed the spirit. In reality, predictability is often what keeps it intact. Today, you lean back into it deliberately. Outside, the city feels altered, quieter, but not peaceful. Christmas afternoon in London carries a strange stillness, broken by pockets of noise, laughter spilling from public houses, footsteps echoing on emptier streets, the occasional shout. Many businesses are closed, many people are indoors, the machinery of survival idles briefly, its gears cooling before tomorrow restarts everything. You step outside for air, coat pulled tight. The fog has thinned, revealing pale winter light that feels almost fragile. You pass others doing the same. Short walks, quick glances, nods exchanged without conversation. There's an unspoken recognition among you. You all made it through the day. That counts for something. A historical fact drifts through your thoughts as you walk. Boxing Day, tomorrow, will bring its own customs. Employers giving small gifts to servants, tradesmen expecting tips, charity boxes opened. For the poor, it's often less celebratory and more transactional. The holidays, like everything else, extend obligations as much as relief. Back inside, the room cools steadily as the fire dies. You resist the urge to stoke it again. Coal must last. Christmas has had its allowance. The return to restraint is swift, almost jarring. This is one of the cruelties of scarcity, the contrast. Enjoyment is sharper, but so is its end. Someone suggests saving a bit of food for later. The idea is met with quiet approval. Even now, planning resumes. Habits snap back into place easily. You wrap what little remains and set it aside, labelling it mentally as future security. There's comfort in that act, in knowing tomorrow's hunger is at least partially addressed. The children grow sleepy earlier than usual. Rich food, warm air, emotional exertion, it all takes its toll. You help them settle, adjusting blankets, murmuring reassurances. Their faces relax quickly, bodies surrendering to rest without resistance. You envy that ease. Sleep for you is slower, weighed down by thought. As the room quiets, you reflect on the day. Not sentimentally, but practically. What worked? What didn't? How close you came to not pulling it off. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether holidays among the poor were sources of genuine happiness or merely brief illusions. You find the question oddly beside the point. Illusion or not, the experience was real. It left a mark. You think again of the workhouse, of how narrowly you avoided its pull this season. Christmas did not save you from it, but it gave you a buffer, emotional, communal, psychological. That matters. Survival is not only about bodies, it's about reasons to keep moving them. The city outside begins to reassert itself as evening deepens. Somewhere a cart rattles. Somewhere else, an argument breaks out. The sounds of ordinary hardship creep back in, familiar and grounding. You don't resent them. They mean continuity. Life, unpaused. There's a quirky belief you once heard, that the spirits of the dead are closest on Christmas night, lingering to observe how the living fare. You don't fully believe it, but the idea stays with you. If anyone were watching now, they'd see something unspectacular but honest. A family tired but intact. A room worn but functional. A day marked, then released. You sit quietly for a while, letting the stillness settle. This is not something you get often. Time without immediate demand. You use it to breathe deeply, to stretch sore muscles, to let your thoughts wander without urgency. These moments are rare and easily squandered. You don't squander this one. Eventually you prepare for sleep. Tomorrow will not be forgiving. Work will resume, if it can be found. Wages will again be uncertain. The children will be expected to contribute. Christmas does not suspend reality for long. You accept that without bitterness. Resentment wastes energy you can't afford. As you lie down, the room dark and quiet, you take stock one last time. Food remains, though little. Health is fragile, but holding. Shelter persists. Togetherness endures. These are not small things, even if they're often treated as baseline expectations. The bells ring faintly in the distance, marking the day's end. Not triumphantly, just steadily. They don't celebrate, they count. And in that counting, there's reassurance. Time continues. You continue with it. Christmas has passed, leaving behind no miracles, no transformations. But it has done something subtler. It reminded you that even within severe limits, you can still shape experience, still create meaning, still claim moments of warmth against the cold arithmetic of survival. Sleep comes at last, carrying you gently into the night. Tomorrow will ask for endurance again. You will give it, as you always do. But tonight, you rest knowing that for one day, you allowed yourself, and those you care for, to feel something beyond necessity. In Victorian London, that may be the quietest victory of all. The night after Christmas feels longer than the one before it, stretched thin by the return of reality. The excitement is gone now, burned away like the last of the candle. What remains is darkness familiar enough to navigate without fear, but heavy with consequence. You lie awake longer than usual, not because you're anxious, but because your body resists surrendering the warmth it briefly remembered. Outside, the city has resumed its low, constant murmur. Christmas does not quiet London for long. Carts creak in the distance, boots scuff along stone, someone coughs somewhere nearby, always the coughs. Winter has reclaimed its territory, and with it the understanding that this season is not over just because the holiday is. This is, astronomically speaking, the darkest stretch of the year. A historical fact you've heard repeated often enough to believe it. The winter solstice has only just passed, and although the days will technically begin to lengthen, the change is imperceptible. Light returns so slowly it might as well be standing still. For the poor, this matters. Less light means less work, less warmth, less margin for error. Sleep comes in pieces. You drift, wake, drift again. Each time, your thoughts pick up where they left off. Tomorrow's work, the rent, the cough, still quiet, but present. You listen for it the way sailors listen for changes in wind. This vigilance has become second nature. Even rest here is alert. Eventually morning arrives, if it can be called that. The grey light is thinner today, diluted, as if Christmas used up more than its share. You rise carefully, joints stiff, muscles reluctant. The room feels colder than it did yesterday, and you don't imagine it. Fires burned longer than usual. Coal paid the price. The children wake slower now, the holiday softness clinging to them like sleep they don't want to release. You don't scold. You let them have a few extra moments, knowing full well those moments won't come free. Time, like everything else, must be repaid. Boxing Day waits outside, practical and unsentimental. There's a quirky custom tied to this day that you're aware of even if you've never benefited from it directly. Employers giving boxes of leftover food or small gifts to servants and workers. It's where the day gets its name. For many in your position, it's more myth than reality, another tradition unevenly distributed. Still, the possibility lingers faintly. Hope has a way of surviving on improbability. You prepare what remains of the food, portioning it carefully. Yesterday's abundance has already been absorbed into memory. Today's meals look much like last week's, just slightly more secure. That security is fragile, easily undone by one bad day. You don't dwell on that. Dwelling doesn't change outcomes. Outside, the city feels sharper, as if it's compensating for yesterday's pause. Shops reopen, work resumes, expectations return fully formed. You step into it without ceremony, shoulders squared, already negotiating with the cold. There's no buffer between celebration and labour here. One ends, the other begins, seamlessly. As you move through familiar streets, you notice signs of other households making the same transition. Bits of greenery wilt on doorways, paper decorations sag, evidence of celebration already decays into clutter. There's something sobering about how quickly festivity becomes debris. It mirrors the experience itself, bright, brief, then gone. Work is scarce today. Many employers take the day off or operate at reduced capacity. You wait anyway because waiting is what you do when the alternative is giving up. Others wait with you, silent, stamping feet to keep warm. There's no camaraderie exactly, but there's recognition. You all understand what this day costs. A scholarly debate often surfaces in accounts of Victorian labour around the holidays. Whether enforced breaks like Christmas genuinely benefited workers, or simply delayed hardship. Observing the idle docks, the closed workshops, you lean toward the latter. Rest without security is not restorative. It's just postponed strain. By midday, hunger begins to press again. You eat sparingly, saving energy where you can. The body adjusts quickly, reverting to habits it knows too well. Yesterday's fullness already feels distant, like something that happened to someone else. Memory, here, is a poor substitute for sustenance. You return home earlier than you'd like, hands empty but mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. Inside, the room greets you with the familiar mix of relief and responsibility. Being home means being needed. Decisions resume immediately. What can be sold if necessary? Who might lend a bit of coal? Which neighbour owes a favour, and which you owe one to? The children sense the shift, their behaviour changing accordingly. Voices soften, movements slow. They've learned the rhythm. Celebration followed by recalibration. There's no tantrum, no complaint, just acceptance. That acceptance unsettles you more than resistance would. It's a sign of how well they've adapted. As afternoon fades into another early night, you light no candle. Darkness returns unapologetically. The fire is coaxed just enough to take the edge off. You sit close together, sharing warmth without comment. Outside, the sky deepens, indifferent to human schedules and holidays. There's an academic argument that winter intensified class divisions in Victorian cities, making poverty more visible and more dangerous. Sitting here, you don't need theory to understand that truth. Winter compresses everything: space, resources, patience. It leaves little room for error or indulgence. And yet something of Christmas lingers, not in food or light, but in memory. The sound of laughter, the warmth of that one day. These recollections don't feed you, but they steady you. They serve as proof that conditions can shift, even briefly. That life is not a single unbroken stretch of deprivation. Night settles fully now, the longest kind, the kind without anticipation attached. You prepare for sleep knowing tomorrow will likely mirror today. That knowledge doesn't crush you, it clarifies. You adjust expectations accordingly. As you lie down, wrapped once more in routine and restraint, you acknowledge the quiet resilience required to move forward from joy back into endurance. Christmas gave you a pause. Now the year demands motion again. You close your eyes, letting the darkness claim its space. The longest night stretches on, but you're still here within it, awake, aware, enduring. In Victorian London, that persistence is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself, but it carries you steadily into whatever light eventually returns. Morning returns without ceremony, stripped of illusion. Christmas is over now in every practical sense, and the city makes no effort to pretend otherwise. You wake to the same grey light, the same cold air pressing into the room, the same familiar inventory of needs waiting to be addressed. If there's disappointment, it's muted. You expected this. Illusions don't last long enough here to be mourned. You sit up slowly, letting your body reacquaint itself with stiffness and fatigue. Yesterday's warmth feels almost embarrassing in hindsight, like a kindness you weren't meant to keep. The fire is low, its embers dull and unconvincing. You stir them anyway, coaxing just enough heat to make movement tolerable. Coal dust smears your fingers again, returning you fully to yourself. The children wake in stages, their faces less expectant now, more composed. They understand, instinctively, that Christmas was a pause, not a pivot. There are no questions about gifts or outings. Instead, they ask what needs doing today. The shift is seamless, and that ease unsettles you more than overt disappointment would have. Adaptation is a skill they've learned too well. Breakfast is simple, bread measured carefully, water warmed just enough to feel intentional. You eat without commentary, already thinking ahead. There's a historical fact that hovers here, rarely acknowledged in festive accounts. For many working families, Christmas did not alter long-term nutritional intake at all. Any surplus was temporary, quickly absorbed by the body's deficits. What mattered was not abundance, but interruption. Outside, the streets are busy again. Boxing Day has passed, and with it any lingering tolerance for idleness. Shops reopen. Employers return to their routines. The city resets with remarkable speed, as if the holiday were a collective dream no one wants to discuss in daylight. You step into that flow, shoulders squared, eyes scanning for opportunity. Work is erratic today. Some places are still half closed, others overwhelmed by backlog. You take what you can. Short tasks, temporary help, anything that trades energy for coin. There's no resentment in this exchange. It's familiar, reliable, in its own harsh way. A quirky detail from the period surfaces as you wait. Some employers deliberately resumed work immediately after Christmas to discourage workers from lingering softness, believing hardship restored discipline. You don't know if that's true, but it sounds plausible. As the day unfolds, the cold sharpens. The brief psychological warmth of the holiday has faded, leaving winter fully exposed again. You notice it in your joints, in the way breath tightens in your chest. The cough resurfaces faintly, a reminder that illness never fully leaves. It only waits. You make a mental note to conserve energy, to avoid damp where you can. Prevention, here, is largely guesswork. By midday you've earned little, but enough to justify the effort. Coins sit heavier in your pocket than they should, weighted by what they represent. Another day deferred from disaster. You don't spend them immediately. You let them exist, solid proof that today counted. Back home, the room receives you with its usual mix of familiarity and demand. The children return shortly after, bringing small contributions of their own. The exchange is efficient, almost businesslike. Authority and dependence shift fluidly in moments like this, shaped not by age or role, but by who brings something in. Victorian family dynamics among the poor often operated this way, though middle-class observers rarely acknowledged it. There's an academic debate that circles this reality. Did such arrangements empower children, or burden them unfairly? Sitting here, you find the question incomplete. Empowerment and burden are not opposites in this context. They coexist, tangled together, shaped by necessity rather than ideology. Afternoon fades quickly, light retreating before you feel ready. You light no candle. Darkness has resumed its rightful place, and resources must be guarded. The fire is fed sparingly, each piece of coal considered before surrendering it to flame. You sit close together, sharing warmth without comment. This closeness isn't sentimental, it's efficient. Conversation drifts toward the future, cautiously. The new year looms ahead, undefined and intimidating. There's no talk of resolutions. Instead, there are adjustments. What might be done differently, what risks can be avoided, what small changes might improve odds. Hope here is not expansive, it's precise. You think about how Christmas is often described as a turning point, a moment of renewal. For you, it feels more like a mirror. It showed you what's possible in small doses, warmth, rest, shared time, and then returned you to the work of making those moments rare but repeatable. Scholars still debate whether holidays among the poor functioned as genuine relief or as emotional pressure valves that preserved the status quo. You suspect they did both, unevenly. As evening settles, you reflect on the day with a kind of clear-eyed acceptance. There were no illusions to lose today, and that has its own comfort. Disappointment requires expectation. Today asked only endurance, and you provided it. The children settle into sleep earlier again, bodies spent, minds already shifting away from yesterday's softness. You watch them for a moment longer than necessary, memorizing the steadiness of their breathing. Continuity matters. As long as nights end this way, quiet, intact, you consider the day a success. You lie down last, the room fully dark now, the city's noise filtering in faintly through walls and distance. Tomorrow will likely mirror today, and the day after that. Winter has weeks left to demand its toll. You don't romanticize what lies ahead, you prepare for it. Christmas is over, but it hasn't vanished entirely. It's settled into memory, where it will be used later, as reference, as reassurance, as evidence that even within narrow limits, life can widen briefly. That knowledge doesn't change your circumstances, but it changes how you carry them. As sleep approaches, you let go of the last traces of holiday softness without regret. Illusions are heavy to carry. What remains, clarity, habit, persistence, is lighter and more useful. In Victorian London, surviving doesn't mean believing things will improve. It means knowing exactly what you're up against and continuing anyway. You close your eyes with that understanding steady in your chest, ready to meet another ordinary day. Food becomes an idea again before it becomes a reality. Christmas allowed you to forget that for a single day, to think of meals as events rather than equations. Now you're back to stretching, measuring, imagining fullness before it arrives. The pot is scraped clean, not dramatically but thoroughly. Every trace matters. Nothing is symbolic now. Everything is functional. You wake with that familiar hollow feeling, not painful yet, just insistent. Hunger doesn't rush you. It waits. You move quietly, aware that the room is colder than it should be for this hour. The fire has gone out completely, leaving only a grey smear of ash. Relighting it takes time, effort and fuel you'd rather not spend yet. You delay, layering clothes instead, making warmth out of friction and proximity. Breakfast is modest enough to barely qualify as such. Bread again, thinner slices than yesterday. Water warmed and flavoured with the memory of tea rather than the substance itself. This is common practice. Victorian households often reused tea leaves multiple times, coaxing out whatever flavour remained. A quirky detail, but one born of necessity rather than thriftiness as a virtue. You sip slowly, letting the warmth do most of the work. The children eat without comment. That's how you know they're truly hungry. When food is scarce, talk disappears. You watch them closely, gauging energy levels, deciding who can do what today without pushing too far. Childhood here isn't protected by age, it's managed by capacity. That calculation rests with you, and it weighs heavier than any sack you've carried. Outside, the city resumes its familiar grind. Christmas feels distant already, folded into the past with unsettling speed. You step into the street and are immediately reminded of scale. How small your concerns feel against London's immensity, and how little that scale helps you. Work remains uncertain. You walk familiar routes, checking familiar places, exchanging nods with familiar faces. Everyone is back to looking for something. By mid-morning you secure a bit of labour. Nothing steady, nothing dignified. Just enough to justify the calories it will cost you. The task is repetitive, physical, and unremarkable. Exactly the kind of work that defines survival here. A historical fact often overlooked. The majority of working-class labour in Victorian London was casual, piecemeal, and invisible, never recorded in ledgers or memoirs. History remembers factories and reforms. It forgets days like this. You work with focus, conserving movement where you can. Hunger sharpens attention in strange ways. It strips away distraction, leaving only the task and the body performing it. There's a perverse clarity in that, one scholars sometimes note when examining labour under scarcity. Efficiency born not of training, but of necessity. You don't romanticize it, you just use it. Payment comes quickly, unceremoniously. Coins press into your palm, colder than you expect. You close your fingers around them, feeling that familiar mix of relief and frustration. It's enough to buy food. It's not enough to change anything. That distinction is important. You don't confuse progress with postponement. On the way home, you stop at a shop you passed without hesitation just days ago. The choice feels heavier now. You calculate again. Bread. Perhaps something to flavour it. Meat is out of reach. You don't even ask. Instead, you buy what will stretch furthest, what can be transformed with heat and time into something that feels like a meal. Victorian cooking among the poor is largely about illusion, making thin things feel thick, making little feel deliberate. Back in the room, the purchase is met with quiet approval. No excitement, just acknowledgement. Plans shift accordingly. Soup will be made tonight. Not rich, not festive, but sustaining. Someone sets to work immediately, movements practiced and economical. This choreography is familiar, refined over years. No one needs instruction. The children hover nearby, watching the pot with disproportionate interest. Hunger has a way of focusing attention. You distract them with tasks, small, manageable, meant to keep them moving without draining them. Activity here is both contribution and coping mechanism. As the soup simmers, the room warms slightly. Steam fogs the air, carrying the faint smell of sustenance. It's not much, but it's something. You sit back briefly, letting the heat reach your hands. Moments like this are easy to underestimate. Warmth is not just comfort, it's medicine. Victorian doctors argued endlessly about the role of environment in health, but among the poor, the conclusion was lived rather than theorised. Cold makes everything worse. There's a quiet discussion about the days ahead. Rent is mentioned, then carefully set aside. Not ignored, just postponed. You all understand the unspoken rule. Deal with what's immediate first. Long-term threats are managed through short-term survival. It's not strategic in the modern sense, but it's effective enough to keep you moving. The soup is served carefully, portions measured to ensure fairness and endurance. You eat slowly, savouring the warmth more than the taste. Hunger recedes just enough to make room for thought again. That's both a relief and a burden. Full stomachs dull worry. Half-full ones sharpen it. As evening approaches, the light fades quickly, reminding you how little of the day truly belongs to you. You light no candle yet. You wait, stretching twilight as far as it will go. Darkness is not the enemy. Waste is. Conversation drifts, subdued but present. Someone recalls a past winter, worse than this one. The story isn't told for drama, but for perspective. It serves its purpose. You've survived harder. That doesn't guarantee anything, but it steadies nerves. There's an ongoing academic debate about whether memory functions as a survival tool under poverty, whether recalling past endurance genuinely improves resilience or simply normalises suffering. Sitting here, you don't analyse it. You feel its effect. The memory doesn't make you hopeful, it makes you capable. When darkness finally claims the room, you light the candle briefly, just long enough to finish eating, to tidy, to prepare for sleep. The flame flickers, small but insistent. You watch it for a moment, thinking about how easily it could be extinguished, how carefully it must be managed. It feels like an appropriate metaphor, though you don't linger on it. You blow it out deliberately, plunging the room back into shadow. The fire is coaxed one last time, just enough to keep the cold from biting too hard overnight. Then you settle in, bodies close, warmth shared. Today was ordinary, that's its achievement. No crises, no windfalls, just the steady conversion of effort into another day survived. In Victorian London, that kind of day is not guaranteed. It's earned, repeatedly, through choices that rarely feel like victories. As you lie down, listening to the city's distant hum, you think briefly of Christmas, not with longing, but with understanding. It wasn't a promise, it was a reminder of what warmth feels like, of what food can be, of what time together offers when it's allowed to exist. Tomorrow will ask the same things today did. You will answer them the same way, not with hope exactly, but with persistence shaped by experience. That here is enough to keep the pot simmering, the fire alive, and the household intact. Sleep comes slowly but steadily. The hunger is quiet now. The cold is managed. The night stretches ahead, but you're prepared to meet it, one ordinary, hard-earned day at a time. Songs don't require full stomachs. They don't demand coal or candles or coin. They rise anyway, slipping into spaces where other comforts can't fit. Tonight, someone hums again, almost absent-mindedly, a tune carried over from Christmas and repurposed for an ordinary evening. It's quieter now, slower, stripped of ceremony. That makes it feel more honest. You don't stop it. You rarely do. Music in this room isn't entertainment, it's regulation. It steadies breath, slows thought, smooths the rough edges of the day. Victorian observers sometimes dismissed working-class music as crude or unrefined, but they missed its function. These songs aren't about performance, they're about pacing life when everything else pushes too fast. The children listen first, then join in softly, voices tentative but sincere. They don't know all the words, and that doesn't matter. They fill gaps with sound, inventing where memory fails. This kind of singing happens everywhere in London's poorer quarters, on stairwells, in alleys, behind closed doors. It's communal without being public, intimate without being precious. A historical fact threads quietly through the moment. Many popular Victorian songs travelled orally long before they were ever printed, changing shape as they moved between households. Lyrics shifted, meanings blurred, ownership dissolved. What mattered was not accuracy, but continuity. You're part of that now, whether you think of it that way or not. The day's fatigue settles in more gently than usual. Perhaps it's the warmth left over from the soup, or the way the song seems to lower the ceiling just enough to make the room feel contained. You sit back, letting the sound wash over you, noticing how tension drains from shoulders without instruction. This is rest of a different kind. Not absence of work, but presence of ease. Stories follow, as they often do. Not formal ones, not lessons, just fragments. Something someone once saw, something someone remembers hearing. These narratives aren't meant to impress. They're meant to distract, to redirect attention away from what's missing toward what can still be imagined. Victorian families leaned heavily on oral storytelling, especially where literacy was limited. Books were luxuries. Voices were not. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about escapism among the poor, whether it offered psychological relief or merely delayed confrontation with hardship. Sitting here, you find the question unhelpful. Escape implies abandonment. This feels more like expansion. The room doesn't disappear. It stretches briefly to include other possibilities. One of the children asks a question that doesn't need answering, something speculative, half-formed. You respond anyway, not with facts, but with reassurance shaped as possibility. You don't promise outcomes. You offer continuity. Tomorrow will come. Tomorrow will be managed. That's enough. The cough surfaces again, faint but noticeable. You pause, listening, ready to intervene if needed. It subsides on its own. You let the song continue. There's a folk belief floating around, never quite confirmed, that music helps the lungs, that singing keeps sickness at bay. Victorian medicine doesn't support this officially, but belief doesn't always require endorsement. Sometimes it just needs repetition. As the evening deepens, the song fades naturally without conclusion. Silence returns, but it's softer now, padded by shared experience. You notice how different this feels from earlier nights, how the quiet no longer presses in as heavily. Nothing material has changed. The fire is still low, food remains scarce, and yet the atmosphere has shifted. This is one of the less visible survival strategies, cultivating moments that don't consume resources. Laughter, story, song. Scholars sometimes categorize these as coping mechanisms, but that makes them sound reactive, secondary. Here, they're essential. They're part of how households regulate morale when material control is limited. You help the children prepare for sleep, movements slow and familiar. Blankets are adjusted. Bodies are arranged for maximum warmth. The choreography is practiced enough to feel automatic, but you remain attentive. Comfort here is deliberate. Nothing is assumed. As they settle, one of them asks about tomorrow, not anxiously, just curiously. You answer honestly but gently. Work will be sought. Meals will be made. The usual. The predictability seems to satisfy them. There's safety in knowing what shape the day will take, even if that shape isn't generous. You sit for a while after they sleep, letting your thoughts wander more freely than usual. Fatigue has softened their edges. You think about how often Victorian literature focused on grand turning points, reforms, inventions, revolutions, while lives like yours moved forward incrementally, shaped by nights like this. No banners, no announcements, just continuation. There's a quirky belief you remember hearing once, that songs linger in walls, that buildings remember what's been sung inside them. You don't believe it literally, but the idea appeals to you. This room has held arguments, coughing, worry, laughter. Tonight it holds music. If walls do remember, you hope they favour moments like this. You prepare for sleep with unusual calm. The cold is present but manageable. The hunger is dulled. The mental noise that usually crowds this hour has quieted. Not vanished, just stepped back enough to let rest approach without resistance. As you lie down, you reflect briefly on the day. It didn't offer improvement, it didn't threaten disaster. It simply unfolded, then closed. Those are the days that build endurance. Not through strain, but through balance. Outside, the city hums on, indifferent to your small reprieve. Somewhere another family sings. Somewhere else someone coughs through the night alone. London contains multitudes like this, layered and simultaneous. You're one thread among many, woven into a fabric too large to see all at once. Sleep comes more easily tonight. The song echoes faintly in your mind, not as melody, but as rhythm. It carries you forward, through darkness, toward whatever morning will require. In Victorian London, survival is not sustained by bread alone. It's sustained by these quieter things, sounds shared, stories told, moments expanded just enough to make room for breath. You drift into sleep held by that understanding, ready to wake and continue, one ordinary night giving way to another day endured. Morning arrives carrying expectations that don't belong to you. The city wakes wrapped in its own stories about what Christmas means and what it should have changed. You feel that pressure even before you step outside, a faint insistence that something ought to be different now. Better, lighter, renewed. You stretch, joints stiff, and dismiss the idea with the practiced ease of someone who knows better. This is where the myths creep in. Dickens has been busy these past years, shaping an image of Christmas that glows with redemption and moral awakening. You've heard people reference his stories, even if they haven't read them. Talk of sudden generosity, of hard hearts softened overnight. A historical fact worth grounding yourself in. A Christmas Carol was published in 1843, and by 1850 its influence is already reshaping expectations around the holiday, especially among the middle classes. The poor, however, are expected to play supporting roles in someone else's transformation. You don't begrudge the stories their warmth. You understand their appeal, but standing here, Pulling on worn boots, you know the difference between narrative and lived experience. No ghost visited your landlord. No employer woke with a revelation. Christmas did not rewrite the terms of your existence. It paused them briefly, then stepped aside. Outside, the streets feel normal again. Fully normal now, the last traces of festivity erased by routine. Bits of greenery have been trampled into the mud. Paper decorations sag and tear. The city cleans up its imagination quickly. London has always been efficient that way. Fantasy is tolerated, but only temporarily. You pass a shop window still displaying a faded holiday scene. It looks absurd now, stranded out of time. A child points at it as you walk by, then loses interest almost immediately. That, you think, is how most people interact with the myth. Momentary fascination followed by practicality. Work is steadier today, though no kinder. You fall into familiar patterns, body remembering what to do even when the mind resists. Labour after the holidays feels heavier somehow, as if expectation itself has added weight to your muscles. Victorian commentators often wrote about holiday softness, warning that rest made workers sluggish. From your vantage point, the opposite feels true. The contrast sharpens fatigue rather than dulling it. As you work, you overhear conversations, people talking about how meaningful Christmas was, how it reminded them to be grateful, to give more, to appreciate what they have. You don't interrupt. Gratitude is not a concept you reject, it's one you practice differently. Yours is not abstract, it's situational. You're grateful when illness recedes, when work appears, when a meal holds together. You don't need a holiday to tell you that. There's an academic debate that runs quietly beneath moments like this. Did Dickensian ideals genuinely improve conditions for the poor by inspiring reform and charity? Or did they sentimentalize suffering in ways that made inequality easier to tolerate? Listening to these conversations, you suspect the answer is both. The stories open some doors, they also close others, convincing people that feeling moved is the same as changing systems. By afternoon, your body reminds you that ideals don't replace calories. You pause to eat, chewing slowly, conserving energy. Hunger doesn't dominate the way it once did. It's been managed into something quieter, more strategic. That adaptation is invisible to those who don't live inside it. To them, hunger is dramatic or tragic. To you, it's procedural. On the way home, you pass a group of people discussing charity drives, collections inspired by Christmas spirit. There's enthusiasm there, genuine and well-meaning. You don't doubt their sincerity. But you notice how quickly the conversation turns to next year, to doing it properly next time. Charity, like celebration, is often future-focused. Need, unfortunately, is not. Back in the room, the day's earnings are added to the small pile you maintain mentally rather than physically. Counting too often invites anxiety. You prefer to assess instead. How long can this last? What does it allow? What does it delay? The children return with their own reports, small contributions, minor incidents. Life reasserts its ordinary texture. Conversation drifts inevitably towards stories of Christmas past, some remembered warmly, others less so. Someone mentions a year when nothing came together at all. Another recalls a kindness from a stranger that never repeated. These memories don't build a coherent narrative. They form a patchwork, uneven and contradictory. That feels accurate. You think again about Dickens, about how his stories favour closure, lessons learned, accounts balanced, hearts changed. Reality doesn't offer such neat resolutions. There are no final chapters here, only continuations. Scholars argue whether this lack of narrative closure makes poverty harder to escape psychologically. Perhaps, or perhaps it simply makes it harder to romanticize. As evening approaches, you feel the day settle into you. Fatigue spreads, but so does familiarity. There's comfort in knowing what to expect, even when what you expect is difficult. Christmas mythology thrives on surprise. Survival thrives on predictability. The children ask questions sparked by something they heard, a tale of someone rich becoming kind. You answer carefully. You don't dismiss the idea outright. Kindness exists. You've seen it. But you also explain gently that kindness doesn't replace fairness, and generosity doesn't fix systems. You're not trying to teach them cynicism. You're teaching them clarity. There's a quirky fringe belief you've encountered, that Christmas magic lingers for 12 days, echoing old traditions of Christmastide. You consider that as you prepare the evening meal. If magic exists here, it's subtle. It shows up as resilience, not transformation. It manifests as continuity, not rescue. As darkness falls, the room fills with the usual sounds: movement, breathing, the low murmur of voices. Nothing dramatic happens, and that, you realise, is the point. The true counter-narrative to Dickensian myth is not despair, but persistence. Life does not need to be redeemed overnight to be worth continuing. You sit quietly for a moment, letting that thought settle. Christmas gave you warmth. Dickens gave the world stories. Neither promised permanence. The danger lies in confusing inspiration with solution. As you prepare for sleep, you feel neither disillusioned nor uplifted. You feel grounded. Myths have their place. So do realities. Knowing which is which, and when to rely on each, is another survival skill learned slowly without instruction. You lie down as the city hums on, indifferent to stories and seasons alike. Tomorrow will bring more work, more calculation, more endurance. You are ready for that. Not because Christmas changed you, but because it reminded you, briefly, what you're enduring for. In Victorian London, surviving the myth is sometimes as important as surviving the cold. You close your eyes with that understanding steady and clear, prepared to keep moving forward in a world that prefers its stories neat and its reality largely unseen. Neighbours are not friends in the way novels like to frame them. They're not chosen, not curated, not always kind. But they are close, and closeness counts for more than affection when survival is communal by necessity. You wake to the familiar sounds of them. Footsteps overhead, a door creaking open down the corridor, a muffled argument already underway somewhere nearby. The building is alive again, fully awake, and that shared wakefulness feels like confirmation. You're still part of something. In places like this, isolation is dangerous. Everyone knows it, even if no one says it aloud. Victorian reformers often focused on the filth and crowding of working-class housing, but they missed something crucial. Proximity also enabled support. When resources are thin, information becomes currency, and neighbours are its primary exchange. You step out briefly to fetch water and are met with the usual nods, half acknowledgements, wordless check-ins. Someone mentions a job rumour, temporary, poorly paid, but real. You file it away. Another warns of a landlord doing rounds early, pressing for arrears. That information lands heavier. You thank them quietly. Gratitude here is practical, not performative. There's a historical truth worth pausing on. Informal neighbour networks often provided more reliable support than formal charities. Food shared quietly. Coal borrowed and repaid. Children watched without paperwork or sermons. Scholars debate whether these systems were empowering or merely compensatory for state neglect. From where you stand, they're indispensable. Back inside, the day's plans adjust immediately based on what you've heard. This responsiveness is key. You don't wait for certainty. You act on likelihood. That's how things move here. Through anticipation rather than assurance. Someone offers to watch the children later if work appears. The offer isn't framed as a favour. It's understood that the balance will be restored another time, in another form. Mid-morning brings a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just present. A neighbour stands there with a small bundle, coal, a few pieces, wrapped in cloth. They don't explain. You don't ask. The exchange is quick, almost embarrassed. You accept it with a nod and a promise that isn't spoken but fully formed. This is how dignity survives here, by minimising spectacle. There's a quirky detail from the period that surfaces as you add the coal to the fire. Many households kept informal tallies of who owed whom, not written down, but remembered collectively. Reputation mattered. Reliability mattered more. You've been careful to maintain yours. It's a form of social capital, earned slowly, spent cautiously. The fire responds gratefully, warming the room faster than expected. The children notice immediately, drifting closer without comment. Warmth has a magnetic pull. You let it spread, careful not to burn too fast. Every gift has a lifespan. You extend it through attention. Later, as you head out again, you pass two neighbours in conversation, voices low. They glance at you, then include you without pause. News travels this way, stitched together from fragments. Someone's ill. Someone found work briefly. Someone's leaving. Moving on or moving out, no one quite sure which. These updates aren't gossip, they're survival data. You add what you know in return. A rumour confirmed. A warning passed along. This reciprocity is constant, almost automatic. There's an academic argument that such dense social networks limited individual mobility by binding people to place. Perhaps, but they also keep people alive long enough to consider mobility at all. By afternoon, the children are with a neighbour, supervised in that loose, watchful way that prioritises presence over structure. You trust this arrangement more than any institution. The building itself feels like an extended household, porous and imperfect but responsive. You head out to pursue the job rumour, heart steady, expectations measured. The work doesn't materialise, not fully. But you learn something else instead. Who's hiring next week, which foreman to avoid, which corner to stand on if you want to be seen. These details matter. You bring them back with you, offerings in the shared economy of information. Inside, the room absorbs the day's outcomes without drama. No windfall, no crisis. The borrowed coal burns down slowly, stretching the evening. Soup is made again, slightly thicker this time. Someone mentions repaying the coal soon, and you agree. Debts are uncomfortable, but unresolved ones are dangerous. You plan already how to settle it. There's an open, scholarly debate about whether working-class neighbourliness was rooted in altruism or mutual self-interest. Sitting here, watching bowls filled and passed along, you see no contradiction. Care and calculation coexist. They don't cancel each other out. They make each other possible. As darkness falls, someone knocks again. This time it's a question. Can you spare a bit of bread? You hesitate only long enough to measure, then agree. Not because you're flush, but because refusal carries a cost too. You portion carefully, handing over what you can. The thanks is brief, sincere and unembellished. You feel the balance shift slightly, the network tightening. Later, voices drift through the walls. Laughter, an argument, a baby crying, a lullaby attempted and abandoned. These sounds are not comforting in the usual sense. They're reassuring because they're constant. Silence here would be alarming. Silence suggests absence. You sit quietly, letting the fire fade naturally. The room cools, but not abruptly. The children return, tired but safe. You settle them with minimal fuss. The day has taken enough from everyone. There's no need to extract more. Before sleep, you reflect on how little of this appears in official records. Census list names and ages. Reports tally conditions, but they don't capture this. How survival is braided together, how one household leans into another, how resilience is distributed across walls and doorways. There's a fringe belief you've heard, half joking, that tenement buildings develop their own spirits, shaped by the lives inside them. You don't believe that literally, but you understand the impulse. This place feels aware, responsive, held together by more than brick and rot. It's held together by obligation and memory. As you lie down, the warmth from earlier lingers faintly. You think about how often narratives of poverty focus on isolation, on abandonment. Those elements exist, yes, but so does this. Imperfect, conditional solidarity that fills gaps left by institutions and indifference. Tomorrow will demand more from you. It always does. But tonight, you rest knowing that you are not facing it alone, even when the facing is quiet and unacknowledged. In Victorian London, neighbours are lifelines. Not ideal ones, not guaranteed ones, but real ones, stretching just far enough to keep you connected, informed, and moving forward. You close your eyes within that web, ready to endure another day, sustained not by charity or myth, but by shared necessity and earned trust. Illness never announces itself politely. It doesn't wait for better timing or clearer margins. It arrives when resources are thinnest, when patience is already stretched, when you're least equipped to absorb another complication. This morning it announces itself through heat, unnatural warmth radiating from skin that should be cool in winter. You notice it immediately. The body knows when something is wrong long before the mind catches up. You place a hand against a forehead and feel the truth settle in. Fever. Not dramatic, not yet, but undeniable. The cough that's been hovering in the background deepens, each breath sounding heavier than it should. This is the moment you've been guarding against, the one winter always threatens. You straighten slowly, already shifting into response mode. Panic would waste time. You don't have time. In Victorian London, illness is rarely isolated. It ripples outward, affecting work, income, housing, everything. A historical fact that hangs over you now. For the urban poor, Sickness was one of the leading causes of descent into the workhouse, not because illness itself was fatal, but because it interrupted labour long enough to unravel everything else. You feel that truth pressing in, immediate and sharp. You keep your voice steady as you give instructions, small ones at first. Water warmed, cloths prepared, the fire coaxed just a bit higher than planned. You break your own rules without apology. This is not indulgence. This is triage. Victorian medicine offers little for fever beyond rest, hydration, and hope. You provide what you can of the first two and ration the third carefully. The room rearranges itself around the sickbed. Others move quietly, instinctively making space. Children are kept back, not out of fear, but caution. Everyone here understands contagion in a practical sense, even if the science is wrong or incomplete. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much Victorian families understood about disease transmission before germ theory. Whatever the textbooks say, lived experience taught vigilance. You send word to a neighbour, not for help yet, but for awareness. If this worsens, you'll need support. If it improves, they'll need to know why you've been quieter than usual. Communication now is preventative, not reactive. The network tightens subtly, readying itself. The day's plans dissolve immediately. Work is abandoned without discussion. You feel the loss keenly, but there's no alternative. You can't afford illness, but you can't ignore it either. That paradox defines much of life here. You choose care, knowing the cost, because the cost of neglect is worse. Hours pass unevenly. Fever rises, then plateaus. The cough rattles, then softens. You sit close, counting breaths, offering sips of water, adjusting blankets with careful hands. Time behaves differently during illness, stretching, compressing, looping back on itself. You don't measure it in hours anymore. You measure it in changes, however small. There's a quirky remedy someone suggests. Mustard poultices applied to the chest, believed to draw out illness. You hesitate. These treatments can do more harm than good. Victorian medicine is full of such contradictions, earnest and dangerous in equal measure. You decide against it, trusting instinct over tradition. Instead, you rely on warmth and rest, the oldest remedies of all. The children watch from a distance, eyes wide and quiet. You answer their questions simply, without dramatising. You've learned that fear spreads faster than fever. Calm here is contagious too. You give them small tasks, fetching water, folding cloths, so they feel useful without being exposed. Responsibility can ground anxiety if managed carefully. Outside, the city continues its indifferent rhythm. You hear carts pass, voices call out, bells mark time. It's unsettling how normal everything sounds while this unfolds inside. Illness creates a bubble, isolating the room emotionally even when walls remain thin. You're acutely aware of how alone this can feel, even surrounded by people. By afternoon, exhaustion sets in, not just physical but mental. Vigilance is tiring. You fight the urge to imagine worst-case outcomes, tuberculosis, pneumonia, words you avoid thinking too loudly. There's an academic debate about how fear of disease shaped Victorian family life, encouraging both closeness and emotional restraint. Sitting here, you feel that tension clearly, wanting to be present without letting dread take over. A neighbour knocks quietly, already informed. They bring a small offering, broth, thin but hot. You accept it with gratitude that feels heavier than usual. Care received during illness carries different weight. It's not transactional, it's stabilising. You make a mental note to repay it when you can, though you know repayment won't balance this moment. That's okay. As evening approaches, the fever begins to ease, not dramatically, just enough to change the texture of the room. Shoulders drop slightly, breaths come easier. You don't celebrate. You've seen false recoveries before. Victorian households knew this pattern well. Improvement followed by relapse, hope followed by loss. You remain attentive, cautious. Night falls slowly, deliberately. You prepare for another long watch, arranging sleep in shifts. Someone must always be awake. This is not paranoia, it's experience. You've learned that illness respects neither darkness nor exhaustion. You make yourself comfortable enough to endure, not enough to relax. There's a scholarly argument that illness forced working-class families into roles of care that strengthened emotional bonds. Sitting here, you're not sure strengthening is the right word. It sharpens them. It strips them of pretense. What remains is attention, presence, endurance. The cough quiets further as the night deepens. Breathing steadies. Fever breaks slightly, sweat cooling skin that was too hot hours ago. You wipe it gently, relief creeping in despite your restraint. This is a turning point perhaps, or just a pause. You don't know yet. You stay awake longer than necessary just in case. The room smells of damp cloth, coal smoke, and that distinct scent of illness you can never quite describe. It's familiar, unwelcome, but not yet overpowering. You cling to that distinction. As the hours stretch on, you allow yourself a small thought of hope. Not recovery, not safety, but momentum. If this continues, work can resume soon. The children can stay healthy. The household can hold. These thoughts are tentative, fragile. You treat them gently. Near dawn, exhaustion finally claims you. You lie down close enough to hear every breath, every shift. Sleep comes lightly, fractured by vigilance, but it comes. Your body needs it. You trust the room, the network, the small signs of improvement. Illness has not taken everything. Not this time. You know better than to assume victory, but you accept this small mercy as it is. A reprieve, not a resolution. In Victorian London, surviving sickness is rarely about cure. It's about timing, care, and the narrow space between collapse and continuation. As sleep edges in, you remain balanced in that space, ready to rise again if needed, determined to hold what you can together for one more day. Morning brings cautious relief, the kind you don't trust yet. You wake with your senses already extended, listening before you move. Breathing sounds steadier. The cough is still there, but it no longer claws at the chest. Fever has retreated to something manageable, leaving behind weakness rather than danger. This isn't recovery, it's reprieve. You accept it carefully, like fragile glass. The room feels altered by the night's vigilance. Everything is closer together now. Bodies, blankets, responsibilities. You stretch stiff muscles and rise quietly, not wanting to disturb what balance has been regained. Outside, dawnlight filters in weakly, pale and unconvincing. Winter doesn't brighten easily. Still, light is light, and you take it as a good sign. The children wake next, alert and anxious, scanning faces before asking questions. You answer honestly but gently. Better, not well. Their relief shows immediately, mixed with restraint they've learned too early. They know how quickly improvement can reverse. You give them small tasks again, grounding them in usefulness. Anxiety burns less fiercely when hands are busy. There's a historical fact that settles into your thoughts as you work. In mid-19th century London, the majority of nursing care for the sick was provided at home, almost entirely by family members, usually women or older children. Hospitals existed, but for the poor they were places of last resort, associated with experimental treatments and separation. Care, like survival, was domestic and unpaid. You prepare food slowly, choosing warmth over quantity. Thin broth again, supplemented with what little you can spare. Appetite is minimal, but hydration matters. Victorian doctors emphasised nourishment during illness, but often prescribed foods impossible for the poor to obtain. You work instead with what you have, trusting warmth and consistency to do what theory cannot. As the morning progresses, the children's behaviour shifts. Their questions turn outward again, to school rumours, to street sounds, to what might happen later today. That shift tells you as much as the patient's breathing does. Fear is loosening its grip. The room exhales collectively, though no one names it. You send word quietly to neighbours that the crisis has eased. Not ended, eased. The distinction matters. Support networks need updates the way bodies need water. You don't want unnecessary worry, but you also don't want silence. In communities like this, absence of information is its own kind of alarm. There's a quirky belief someone mentions in passing that illness leaving before noon is a sign of good fortune. You don't challenge it. Superstition thrives where certainty is scarce, and sometimes belief itself functions as medicine. Victorian households were thick with such ideas, some harmful, some harmless, all attempts to impose pattern on unpredictability. By midday, the sick one sleeps more deeply, the kind of rest that feels earned rather than enforced. You sit nearby, allowing yourself to relax just a fraction. Exhaustion catches up quickly when vigilance drops. You feel it in your bones, in the dull ache behind your eyes. Caring is work, even when it looks like stillness. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about the emotional cost of caregiving among the poor, whether constant responsibility hardened people or deepened empathy. Sitting here, watching chest rise and fall, you don't feel hardened, you feel sharpened. Attention becomes precise, priorities clarify, everything unnecessary falls away. The children whisper among themselves, inventing small games that require minimal movement. You let them. Noise at this volume is not disruption, it's life continuing. You're careful not to silence it completely. Total quiet would feel ominous now, like holding your breath too long. Outside, the city presses on. You hear footsteps, voices, the rattle of carts. Work is happening without you today, and that absence weighs on you even as you know it's necessary. Every hour not earning is an hour the future notices. Still, you remind yourself of the alternative. Illness untreated costs far more. A neighbour stops by briefly, bringing news and reassurance in equal measure. No rent collections today. Work rumoured tomorrow. Someone else ill down the street. Worse than this. Perspective arrives uninvited. You absorb it without comment. Comparison doesn't bring comfort, but it does reinforce urgency. You're walking a narrow line, and you know it. As afternoon light fades, you prepare for another night of watchfulness, though you hope it won't be as intense. You arrange sleeping positions again, keeping yourself close enough to respond quickly. This choreography has become instinctive. Bodies adapt to roles faster than minds do. There's a historical debate you once overheard referenced, whether high child mortality in Victorian cities dulled parental attachment or intensified it. Statistics alone suggest detachment as a coping mechanism. Lived experience suggests something else entirely. You don't love less because loss is common. You love with awareness that love must be active, present, immediate. The cough resurfaces briefly in the evening, enough to spike your attention, then settles again. You note it without reacting. Overreaction wastes energy. Underreaction risks everything. Balance is learned the hard way. Through nights like this, through trial and error, no one records. You offer a small treat before sleep. Warm water sweetened slightly. A kindness rather than a cure. It's accepted gratefully, eyes closing soon after. That gratitude hits you harder than it should. Caregiving creates these asymmetries, these moments where effort and appreciation don't align neatly. You don't dwell on it. Dwelling leads nowhere useful. The children settle more easily tonight, exhaustion overtaking anxiety. You watch them drift off, faces slack with relief. Their resilience impresses you, even as it worries you. Childhood here is elastic, capable of absorbing stress, but only to a point. You make a mental note to watch for signs of strain later, when crisis has passed and emotions catch up. There's an academic argument that poor families lived in a constant state of low-level trauma, punctuated by acute crises. Sitting here, you recognise the pattern. This morning's relief doesn't erase last night's fear. It layers on top of it, forming something dense and complicated. Endurance isn't simple, it accumulates. As night deepens, you allow yourself to sit back fully for the first time since illness took hold. The room is quieter now, steadier. Not safe. Nothing is ever truly safe, but stable enough to breathe without counting. You think briefly about Christmas again, not as memory but as contrast. Illness cares nothing for holidays or recovery days. It moves on its own schedule. Survival, then, is not about planning perfectly, but about responding effectively when plans collapse. Before sleep, you check once more. Forehead cooler, breathing even. You nod to yourself, a gesture so small it barely exists. This is the kind of victory you allow now. Not triumph, not certainty, just continuity. You lie down, body heavy with exhaustion, mind lighter than it was yesterday. The worst has not happened. That's all you claim. Tomorrow will bring its own tests, its own negotiations. But tonight, the household holds. In Victorian London, children's wonder and adult anxiety live side by side, often in the same room, often in the same moment. You carry both as sleep finally claims you. Wonder that care made a difference. Anxiety that it must continue. For now, that balance is enough. The night passes quietly, and in that quiet, you gather strength to face whatever morning asks next. The day after Christmas never arrives gently. It drops you back into rhythm like a stone into water, ripples spreading outward whether you're ready or not. You wake with the familiar sense of calculation already ticking through your thoughts. Who can work today? Who must rest? What can be delayed? What absolutely cannot? The illness has loosened its grip, but it hasn't left entirely. That matters. You factor it in immediately, the way you do with weather or rent or hunger. Morning light slips in thin and pale, barely committed to the idea of day. You rise quietly, checking breathing, checking temperature, checking the subtle signs that tell you whether today can hold more weight than yesterday. Better. Still fragile. You decide. Work will be attempted, but cautiously. No heroics. Victorian survival rarely rewards bravery. It rewards restraint. The children wake alert but subdued, eyes tracking your movements. They sense the shift. Crisis has eased, but tension remains, stretched like a wire that hasn't quite slackened. You give instructions simply, deliberately. One will go out for small errands, another will stay close. Roles settle into place without complaint. They've learned to read the room better than most adults. Outside, London has fully returned to itself. Christmas is gone not just from shops and streets, but from conversation. The city wastes no time on reflection. Work is work again. Hunger is hunger again. Bells ring for hours and shifts, not for celebration. You step into the cold with a feeling that's almost familiarity, as if routine itself has wrapped around you like an old coat. You take the long way toward places where work sometimes appears, partly to stay warm, partly to listen. The city speaks constantly if you know how to hear it. Snippets of argument, shouts from foremen, rumours carried on breath and boots. You collect information the way others collect wages. Today, information feels especially valuable. A historical fact sits heavily in your thoughts as you wait. For most working families in Victorian London, missing even a single week of income could cascade into debt, eviction, or institutionalisation. There were no buffers, no savings accounts to absorb shock. Recovery from illness wasn't just physical, it was economic and far less forgiving. You managed to secure short work, nothing steady, nothing promising, but real enough to matter. You take it without negotiation. Your body protests quietly, reminding you it hasn't fully recovered from nights of vigilance and thin meals. You listen to it just enough to avoid collapse. Pushing too hard now could undo everything. The labour is slower today, more deliberate. You pace yourself, conserving energy, ignoring the pressure to perform at full capacity. Victorian labour culture prized endurance, but bodies had limits no ideology could override. You've learned where yours are, even if respecting them comes at a cost. Payment arrives, modest but necessary. You don't linger, you don't celebrate. Coins go into your pocket with the same solemnity as always. They represent not comfort, but time. Another day or two before the edge draws closer again. Time is the most precious currency you have. On the way home, you make careful purchases. Food that supports recovery rather than just survival. Warmth rather than quantity. You avoid indulgence instinctively. Christmas already claimed that space. Now the focus is stability. Victorian households often oscillated between brief abundance and long restraint. You're firmly back in the latter phase. Inside, the room absorbs you again, reshaping itself around presence and need. The children report their own small successes. A neighbour checked in. Another offered help later if needed. The network remains intact, flexing quietly. You acknowledge this with relief you don't voice aloud. Dependence is safest when it's mutual and unspoken. The sick one sits up today briefly. That moment carries disproportionate weight. Upright means strength returning. It also means expectation. You caution gently, insisting on rest, even as relief pushes you toward optimism. Victorian families often struggled with this transition, knowing when recovery was real enough to resume labour without inviting relapse. You err on the side of caution, despite the cost. Afternoon settles in slowly, light fading before you feel ready. You prepare food again, a little thicker than yesterday, mindful of nourishment's role in recovery. Victorian medical texts emphasised meat and broth for the ill, but access determined practice. You do what you can with what you have, trusting warmth and consistency over doctrine. Conversation resumes its ordinary cadence, not hushed now, but careful. Laughter flickers briefly, then recedes. No one pushes it. The children drift between tasks and restlessness, energy returning unevenly. You watch closely, aware that emotional release often lags behind crisis. The body stabilizes first, the mind follows later, if given space. There's an academic debate about the psychological aftermath of crisis among impoverished families, whether relief leads to resilience or delayed stress responses. Sitting here, you recognize both patterns unfolding at once. Calm returns, but vigilance lingers. That vigilance has saved you too many times to abandon easily. As evening approaches, fatigue settles again, heavier than before. Caregiving, labour, and worry stack quietly. You feel it in your spine, in the dull ache behind your eyes. You don't fight it, you plan around it. Energy must be rationed as carefully as food. You light the fire early tonight, allowing yourself that small concession. Recovery requires warmth, and tonight you decide it's justified. The room responds quickly, breath visible less often, muscles loosening without comment. You sit closer together, sharing heat and presence. These moments don't look like progress from the outside. Inside, they're everything. There's a quirky belief you recall hearing that the day after illness breaks is the most dangerous, when people feel well enough to overreach. You take that seriously. You enforce rest with firmness disguised as kindness. No one argues. Experience has taught everyone here the cost of impatience. As darkness settles fully, you reflect on how quickly Christmas has receded into memory, replaced by something far more urgent and intimate. Illness reorders priorities ruthlessly. It reminds you what matters when symbolism falls away. Breath, warmth, continuity. Before sleep you check once more. The fever has not returned. The cough is present but quieter. Strength is returning slowly, like light after solstice. Imperceptible but real. You allow yourself a measured sense of relief, careful not to let it bloom into confidence. You lie down at last, body heavy, mind quieter than it's been in days. Tomorrow will demand more labour, more calculation, more restraint. But tonight, the household holds steady. That's no small thing. In Victorian London, the day after Christmas rarely offers reflection or reward. It offers return. Return to work, return to worry, return to endurance. You meet it not with bitterness, but with practiced resolve. As sleep takes you, you understand something clearly. Survival isn't a single act, or even a series of dramatic ones. It's accumulation. Of choices made under pressure, of care offered when it costs, of restraint exercised even when hope flares. The day after Christmas asks nothing special of you. It simply asks that you continue, and you do. Debt doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't kick in the door or demand attention all at once. It accumulates quietly, patiently, like frost creeping across a window pane. You feel it this morning before anyone mentions it, an unease settling into your thoughts as you count what remains and what is already spoken for. Rent, food, coal. The numbers don't fight you. They simply refuse to line up. You sit with the figures longer than usual today, not because they've changed, but because the margin has. Illness narrowed it. Christmas bent it. Survival continues to depend on the same arithmetic, but now the sums are tighter, less forgiving. Victorian London runs on this kind of math, invisible but relentless. Every household does its own version, day after day, knowing full well it will never quite resolve. The rent is the largest shape in your mind. It always is. Food can be stretched, heat can be borrowed, but rent is fixed, immovable, enforced by a system that has little patience for explanation. A historical fact presses itself forward. By mid-century, housing costs in London consumed a disproportionate share of working-class income, especially in overcrowded districts. Falling behind didn't mean negotiation. It meant eviction. You don't speak the word aloud yet. Saying it too early gives it power. Instead, you review options. What can be delayed? What can be supplemented? Who might extend credit briefly? Credit here is not formal. It's personal. A shopkeeper who knows you. A landlord who tolerates lateness. A neighbour willing to lend. Each option has a cost beyond interest. Reputation is always at stake. Outside, the city hums with its usual indifference. People move with purpose, some toward wages, others toward debt of their own. You're not unique in this. That knowledge doesn't comfort you as much as it used to. Shared struggle doesn't reduce individual consequence. The system doesn't care how common your situation is. You head out with intent today, scanning not just for work but for leverage, overtime, extra tasks, anything that might add a few more coins to the balance. The body is still recovering, but the calendar doesn't pause for that. You move carefully, pacing yourself, choosing tasks that trade time for money without risking relapse. It's a delicate calculation, one Victorian workers made constantly without naming it as such.
Work comes sporadically, pieced together from errands and favors. It's exhausting in a different way than steady labor. Less physical strain, more uncertainty. You accept it anyway. Uncertainty is preferable to stagnation. Each coin earned feels heavier today, burdened with expectation. You count them more than once, hoping repetition might change their number. By midday, you've earned enough to feel the weight shift slightly. Not relief, just adjustment. The math still doesn't work, but it doesn't collapse immediately either. You take a moment to breathe, leaning against a wall, letting fatigue settle. Victorian life rarely offers rest without guilt. You accept this pause as strategic rather than indulgent. On your way back, you stop at a familiar shop. The proprietor knows you well enough to greet you by sight. There's a conversation here that's happened before, always polite, always edged with implication. You ask about credit, not much, just a little time. The answer is cautious, but not dismissive. That's a victory of sorts. Trust, once earned, extends further than coin. There's an open scholarly debate about whether informal credit networks help stabilize poor households or trapped them in cycles of dependence. Standing here, you see both truths at once. Credit buys time. It also narrows future choices. But time is what you need most right now, and you take it without apology. Back home, the household absorbs the news quietly. Plans shift again, purchases postponed, portions adjusted, no one protests. Everyone understands the stakes. Debt doesn't inspire drama. It inspires discipline. You watch the children adapt instantly, their expectations recalibrating without complaint. That ease unsettles you, but you don't comment. Adaptation is survival here, even when it looks like resignation. The landlord's name surfaces in conversation, briefly, cautiously. Someone mentions seeing him nearby earlier. That information lands like a dropped plate, sharp, immediate. You decide to prepare rather than hide. Preparation here means readiness, not confrontation. Have what you owe. Have an explanation. Have witnesses if necessary. Victorian tenancy offers little protection. Presence and punctuality are often your only defenses. As afternoon fades, you revisit the numbers. You lay them out clearly now, no longer avoiding the conclusion. You are short, not catastrophically, but enough to require intervention. You weigh the final option, selling something. It's not new, it's not dramatic, it's simply the last lever available. You look around the room, inventorying possessions with a practical eye. Each object holds memory, but memory doesn't pay rent. You select carefully, choosing something useful but replaceable. The decision carries a familiar ache, not grief, but frustration. You've been here before, you'll be here again. That's what bothers you most. There's a quirky detail from the era that drifts through your mind. Pawn shops flourished in Victorian London, especially after holidays, as families converted gifts and keepsakes into cash. Pawning wasn't shameful, it was routine, a temporary solution with long-term implications. You consider the option seriously, already calculating how and when redemption might occur. Evening settles in with its usual quiet insistence. The fire is kept low. Conversation remains practical. The children ask questions that skirt the issue, and you answer truthfully but gently. Money is short. Things will be tight. They accept this with the same calm they bring to most realities. It's a skill they've mastered early. There's an academic argument that constant financial stress erodes cognitive capacity, making planning more difficult over time. Sitting here, you understand the theory intimately. The mental load is real. It presses down, narrowing focus, draining energy, and yet planning continues. Not because it's easy, but because the alternative is worse. As night deepens, you prepare for sleep with the numbers still echoing faintly in your mind. You've done what you can today. You've extended credit. You've earned what was available. You've identified what can be sacrificed if necessary. That's the work of survival, too. Unpaid, unrecognized, but relentless. Before lying down, you take one last look at the room. At the people who depend on these calculations, whether they understand them fully or not. The responsibility settles over you again, heavy but familiar. You don't resent it. You've learned to carry it the way you carry everything else, steadily, without ceremony. Debt will not be resolved tomorrow. Rent will not become easier. The math will not suddenly work in your favor. But tonight, the numbers are contained. They haven't spilled over into disaster yet. That matters. In Victorian London, survival is often less about progress than about postponement. Pushing consequences just far enough ahead to live another day. You close your eyes knowing tomorrow will bring more arithmetic, more negotiation, more quiet decisions that never make headlines. And when morning comes, you'll sit up again, count again, adjust again. Not because you believe the system will change, but because persistence is the only variable you still control. Defiance doesn't always announce itself with raised voices or clenched fists. Most days it's quieter than that, small, deliberate choices made in spaces where resistance is not supposed to exist. You feel it this morning as you wake, not as anger, but as resolve. The numbers still don't work. The future still looks narrow. And yet, you get up anyway. That here is a kind of rebellion. The room is cold when you rise, colder than yesterday. You pause before relighting the fire, measuring how much warmth you can afford versus how much you need. In the end, you choose just enough. This, too, is defiance, refusing both indulgence and deprivation, insisting instead on balance where the world offers extremes. Victorian moralists like to talk about self-discipline as virtue. What they didn't understand is how much discipline poverty already demands. The children stir, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and you watch them closely for signs of lingering illness or strain. They look tired but whole. That matters. You send them out with small tasks, purposeful but manageable. Keeping them moving, keeping them involved. This is not about productivity. It's about dignity. Being useful reminds you that you still belong to the world beyond survival. Outside, London presses in as usual, vast and unconcerned. You walk familiar streets, but today you notice details you usually overlook. The way sunlight briefly catches on wet stone, the rhythm of footsteps matching your own, the smell of bread drifting from somewhere you can't see. These sensations don't change your circumstances, but they remind you that the city is more than a machine grinding people down. It is also a place where life insists on being noticed. You pass a group of men waiting for work, their posture guarded, eyes sharp. You join them briefly, exchanging nods. There's an unspoken understanding here. No one owes anyone cheerfulness. What you share is presence. A historical fact surfaces quietly. By mid-century, casual labor markets like this were growing rapidly, especially after industrial restructuring pushed skilled workers into competition with the unskilled. Solidarity existed, but it was fragile, constantly tested by scarcity. Work doesn't come today, not for you. You wait longer than you should, hoping persistence might be mistaken for employability. Eventually, you move on, choosing motion over stagnation. This decision is another small act of defiance, refusing to let the day define you solely by its refusals. On your way back, you stop briefly where a public notice has been pasted, its language stiff and official. It announces something about reform, about improvement, about progress. You read it carefully, not because you expect it to help you now, but because you want to understand the world that claims to be changing around you. Victorian London is full of promises written on paper and paid for by people who never see the benefit. Knowing that doesn't make you cynical. It makes you precise. Back in the room, the atmosphere shifts when you return empty-handed. No one comments, no one needs to. You share what you learned instead. Where work might appear tomorrow, who to avoid. Which shopkeeper seems open to credit this week. Information becomes contribution, You refuse to be useless just because you earned nothing today. There's an open, scholarly debate about whether the poor in Victorian cities internalized blame for their circumstances or developed oppositional worldviews. Sitting here, you find that neither fits quite right. You don't blame yourself for the system, but you don't romanticize resistance either. You exist in a middle space, aware, adaptive, unwilling to surrender your sense of self, even as options shrink. Midday brings a brief moment of levity. Someone tells a story, dry, understated, ending not with a punchline but with recognition. Laughter follows, brief but real. Humor here isn't escapism, it's calibration. It keeps despair from distorting perception. Victorian humor among the working class was often described as dark or coarse by observers who didn't understand its function. It wasn't meant to entertain outsiders. It was meant to keep insiders steady. You prepare food again, stretching it as you've done so many times it feels instinctive. There's a quiet pride in this competence. You know how to make things last. You know how to adapt recipes, repurpose scraps, transform necessity into routine. These skills aren't taught in schools or praised in books, but they're learned thoroughly here. Survival is an education with no graduation. As afternoon fades, you consider the item you selected to sell if needed. You take it out, examine it carefully. It carries memory, yes, but also function. You weigh the decision again, not because you've changed your mind, but because you respect the cost. Choosing to sell is not failure, it's strategy. Still, you delay one more day. That delay itself feels like resistance, holding on to something of value just a little longer. There's a quirky belief you've heard, half in jest, that objects absorb the lives lived around them, that selling something too soon invites misfortune. You don't believe it literally, but you understand the impulse. Letting go matters more when you have so little to begin with. You place the item back carefully, giving yourself permission to decide later. The children return with their own small reports, errands run, messages delivered, nothing dramatic. Their ordinariness feels reassuring. Crisis has a way of making everything feel urgent. Ordinary days reassert proportion. You praise them quietly, not lavishly. Excess praise can feel hollow here. What matters is acknowledgement. As evening approaches, you light the fire just enough to take the edge off. The room settles into its familiar rhythm. There's no sense of defeat, but no false optimism either. You exist in a narrow lane between the two, where most lives like yours unfold. This lane doesn't appear in grand narratives, but it's crowded with people who keep going anyway. There's an academic argument that endurance itself became a cultural value among the Victorian poor, replacing ambition where opportunity was limited. Sitting here, you resist that framing slightly. Endurance isn't a value you choose. It's a condition you respond to. The value lies in how you endure, with awareness, with care for others, with refusal to become smaller inside, even when space tightens around you. As night deepens, you prepare for sleep with deliberate calm. Tomorrow may force your hand regarding the sale. Tomorrow may bring work or none at all. Tomorrow may undo today's careful balance. You acknowledge these possibilities without letting them dominate. Worry, like hunger, must be managed. You lie down, listening to the familiar sounds of the building, movement, breath, life continuing imperfectly. Somewhere nearby, someone argues. Somewhere else, someone sings softly. These sounds weave together into a reminder that you are not alone in this quiet defiance. Many endure alongside you, unseen, uncelebrated. Before sleep takes you, you reflect briefly on what defiance looks like here. It's not overthrow. It's not escape. It's the refusal to let scarcity define your worth. It's feeding others before yourself without bitterness. It's learning the rules well enough to bend them when needed. It's waking up again, even when yesterday offered no reward. In Victorian London, the system is large and impersonal, but so is the accumulation of small acts that resist being erased by it. Tonight, your defiance is simple and sufficient. You remain present, intact, unwilling to disappear quietly. You close your eyes knowing tomorrow will test that resolve again. And when it does, you will answer. Not with grand gestures, but with the same steady persistence that has carried you this far. Endurance doesn't feel heroic from the inside. It feels repetitive, circular, almost dull. You wake, you assess, you act, you adjust, again and again. There's no swelling music, no sense of climax, just the steady accumulation of days that didn't quite defeat you. This morning feels like that kind of day. Ordinary, demanding, uninterested in symbolism. Your body rises before your thoughts do, muscle memory guiding you through familiar motions. The cold has settled deep into the building overnight, finding every crack, every weakness. You breathe it in and out slowly, letting your body warm itself before you attempt anything else. Fires are lit too quickly by those who don't understand how long the day will be. You wait. Patience here is not virtue, it's strategy. The household wakes in stages, each person calibrating themselves against the day ahead. The children move more easily now, health largely restored, though energy still comes in uneven bursts. You watch them carefully, not hovering, but attentive. Endurance is not pushing everyone to their limit. It's knowing where the limits are and working just inside them. Outside, the city presents the same challenges it always does. But today, you notice how practiced your responses have become. You don't rush, you don't freeze. You move with the confidence of someone who knows the terrain, not because it's safe, but because it's familiar. Victorian London changes rapidly in some ways. New buildings, new machines, new crowds, but the underlying pressures remain stubbornly consistent. You've learned how to navigate those. A historical fact surfaces as you walk. By 1850, life expectancy for the urban poor in London hovers shockingly low, dragged down by infant mortality, disease, and labor-related injuries. Many don't get the luxury of long-term planning. Endurance, then, is not about the future in an abstract sense. It's about staying alive long enough for tomorrow to matter. You search for work again, not with desperation, but with persistence, sharpened by experience. You know which places to avoid, which times to wait, which faces to watch. This knowledge isn't written anywhere. It's earned through repetition, through days that ended empty-handed and others that didn't. Scholars sometimes describe this as tacit knowledge, but that phrase feels too polite for how hard won it is. Today, work appears late and leaves early. You take it anyway. Short labor is still labor. You perform it efficiently, conserving energy, minimizing waste. There's a rhythm to this that feels almost meditative when hunger isn't too loud. The body learns how to move just enough, no more, no less. This is not laziness, it's sustainability. Payment comes and goes quickly, converted into necessities almost immediately. You don't linger over the coins. You don't imagine alternatives. Fantasizing costs energy you can't afford. You buy what supports continuity, food, warmth, small stability. Each purchase is a vote for another day held together. Back home, the room absorbs these choices without comment. No one applauds, no one questions. The household has learned to recognize progress without celebration. Survival doesn't announce itself, it simply continues. There's an open scholarly debate about whether long-term endurance under poverty reshapes identity, whether people begin to define themselves primarily by resilience. Sitting here, you resist that idea. Endurance is something you do, not who you are. You are still more than your ability to survive, even if survival occupies most of your time. Afternoon passes quietly, marked by small tasks and minimal conversation. The children work on something together, inventing structure where none is provided. You watch them from a distance, noticing how competence emerges early here, not because it's encouraged, but because it's required. There's pride in that, tangled with worry. You want them capable. You don't want them burdened. The line between the two is thin and constantly shifting. As daylight fades, you revisit the decision you've been postponing. The item set aside to sell waits patiently, unchanged. You pick it up again, feeling its weight, its history. You consider the numbers once more. Selling it would ease pressure. Keeping it preserves something less tangible. You make the choice at last, not dramatically, but firmly. Tomorrow, it will go. The decision doesn't feel like surrender. It feels like adaptation. Victorian survival is full of these moments, choosing when to let go so that something else can continue. Scholars sometimes frame this as sacrifice, but that word implies nobility. This feels more practical than noble. You're not giving something up for a cause. You're trading it for time. Evening settles in with its familiar quiet. The fire burns low. Food is prepared and shared. Conversation drifts without urgency. The children ask about tomorrow, and you answer honestly. Errands, schooling if available, work if found, the usual. They accept this without drama. Predictability has become a comfort. There's a quirky belief you recall hearing once, that the human body adapts to hardship the way skin adapts to cold, thickening over time. You're not sure that's entirely true. Some things adapt, others simply endure. But you do know this. You are not the same person you were before all this repetition shaped you. You are quicker to assess, slower to panic, more precise in what you give your energy to. As night deepens, you prepare for sleep with the same careful economy you bring to everything else. Blankets adjusted, bodies positioned. The room settles into its nightly rhythm. You listen to it for a moment, the breathing, the faint sounds from neighboring rooms, the distant hum of the city continuing its own endurance. There's an academic argument that the poor were invisible in Victorian narratives except when they served as moral examples or warnings. Sitting here, you think about how little of this steady, unremarkable persistence, fits into those stories. There's no lesson neatly extracted from a day like this. No transformation, just continuation. And yet, that continuation is the point. Endurance doesn't need witnesses to matter. It doesn't need to be framed as virtue or tragedy. It exists because it must, because stopping is not an option afforded to you. You lie down with the weight of the day still present, but manageable. Tomorrow will ask for another decision, another calculation, another adjustment. You will answer it the same way you always do, not with certainty, not with optimism, but with practiced resolve. In Victorian London, endurance becomes a way of life not because it's celebrated, but because it works. It keeps roofs overhead, fires burning, people breathing. It turns days that could have ended badly into days that simply end. As sleep finally takes you, you don't think about victory or defeat. You think about morning, about rising again, about doing this once more. And somehow, that thought doesn't feel crushing. It feels sufficient. Morning arrives with the same quiet insistence it always has, but today it carries something different. Not relief, not optimism, but resolve sharpened by repetition. You wake knowing exactly what must be done. The decision made last night has settled fully now. No longer tentative, no longer debated. Today, you will let something go so that everything else can hold. You rise carefully, taking a moment to listen to the room. Breathing is steady. The children sleep deeply, bodies finally free of the tension that lingered after illness. The building creaks as others wake too, neighbors beginning their own calculations, their own negotiations with the day. This shared rhythm steadies you. You are not alone in this moment, even if the path ahead feels singular. You take out the item you've chosen to sell and wrap it carefully. Not because it's fragile, but because respect matters. Letting go doesn't mean discarding without care. In Victorian London, objects often circulate through many lives, carrying stories with them. You imagine where this one might end up next, serving someone else's need as it once served yours. Outside, the air is sharp and clean in that deceptive winter way. The sky is pale, undecided. You walk with purpose, not rushing, not hesitating. Pawn shops are already open, their windows crowded with goods that tell 1,000 quiet stories of compromise and necessity. You enter without drama. This place is not shameful, it is practical. The transaction is brief. The pawnbroker appraises, calculates, offers. You accept without argument. The sum is modest but sufficient, enough to settle what needs settling, to restore a small measure of balance. A historical fact grounds the moment. Pawnbroking was a cornerstone of working-class financial survival in Victorian cities, used not as a last resort, but as a recurring tool. Redemption was hoped for, not guaranteed. You keep that in mind as you pocket the coins. Leaving the shop, you feel lighter and heavier all at once. The weight of the object is gone. The weight of responsibility remains. That's expected. You don't linger on the feeling. Lingering doesn't help. Action does. You move efficiently now, paying what must be paid, smoothing what can be smoothed. Rent first, always rent. The relief is subtle but immediate, like pressure easing from behind the eyes. Disaster has been postponed again, not avoided forever, but pushed far enough ahead to keep moving. In this world, that counts as success. Back home, the news is received quietly. No celebration, no lament, just acknowledgement. Plans adjust one last time, settling into a configuration that feels stable, at least for now. The children sense the shift even before you explain it. Tension loosens. The household breathes easier. There's an academic debate about whether hope among the poor was future-oriented or situational, whether people like you hoped for change or simply for continuity. Sitting here, you understand the answer isn't either-or. You hope for continuity so that change remains possible. Without continuity, hope has nothing to stand on. The day unfolds without incident. Work appears briefly, enough to matter. Food is prepared, shared, eaten. The fire burns low but steady. Ordinary sounds fill the room. Nothing dramatic happens, and that feels like an achievement. Crisis has a way of making quiet feel luxurious. As afternoon fades, you think about the year ahead. Not in terms of goals or resolutions, but in terms of endurance. Winter still has time left to demand its toll. Illness may return, work may disappear again. None of that is abstract, it's expected, and yet you've carried yourself this far, through Christmas, through sickness, through debt balanced just enough to breathe. There's a quirky belief you recall hearing, that how you enter the new year determines how it treats you. You don't put much stock in superstition, but you like the idea of thresholds, of moments that mark passage. If this is a threshold, you cross it not with celebration, but with steadiness. Evening settles in gently. The room feels familiar again, not strained, not braced, just lived in. The children talk about small things, games, errands, imagined futures that cost nothing to imagine. You listen without correcting them, without tempering their words too much. Let them dream within reason. Dreams don't drain resources. Despair does. As night deepens, you prepare for sleep with an unfamiliar sensation edging in. Not comfort exactly, but equilibrium. Things are not good, but they are workable. That distinction matters. You've earned it through dozens of quiet decisions no one will ever record. There's a final scholarly argument that lingers invisibly here, whether survival itself can be considered a success in systems designed to grind people down. From the outside, the answer might seem bleak. From the inside, it's clear. Survival is not passive. It is active, deliberate, skilled. You lie down, the city humming faintly beyond the walls. Tomorrow will come with its own demands, and you will meet them as you always have. Eyes open, expectations measured, resolve intact. Christmas is now firmly behind you, folded into memory alongside illness, debt, warmth, song. It has done what it could. The rest is up to endurance. As sleep takes you, you feel no grand sense of hope, no promise of transformation. What you feel instead is quieter and stronger, a confidence born of having lived through what should have broken you and finding yourself still here. In Victorian London, hope is not ablaze. It is a coal carefully banked, kept alive through attention and restraint. Tonight, it glows steadily in the dark, enough to warm the space around you, enough to carry you forward into the new year.